Hello, everyone. Our next our next speaker is Pavel Ferreri. He is Alliances and Business Partner, GTM Strategy Leader, and Chief Evangelist. Pavel has worked for global technology leaders Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce, and IBM, helping global clients envision and bring into life transformative solutions to their most complex challenges. He was also a television host, show host, live on TV for 5 years. His expertise including orchestrating complex selling cycles, including hybrid cloud, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, software, AI, data analytics, IoT, blockchain, DevOps, hardware, strategy, implementation services. We are switching to Pavel Ferreri right now, and without further ado, I'm presenting you the Pavel Ferreri.
Fantastic. Thank you, Blas. And hey there, can you hear me there?
Yes, we can hear. Can hear and see you.
Okay, I had to mute my computer because I was getting some feedback there. But anyway, well, thank you very much for that introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone around the world, wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome again to this online summit on digital reinvention in these turbulent times. I want to thank the Silicon Valley Innovation Center for inviting me as a speaker today, alongside this lineup of very interesting talks from everyone else. It is my pleasure to be here today to serve all of you, sharing my perspective on these challenging times. And so the specific talk that I will have a few moments to share with you is around rethinking supply chains and business ecosystems for the post-COVID-19 world. And I just want to share on a personal note that I empathize with all of you that might be struggling with this uncertainty. And I can share, I am very well accustomed to working remotely because that's the way I've done it for the past 15 years. So the work from home has nothing new to me. However, I can share that it's been already just 3 weeks, and I am already feeling the pain of the social distancing and the isolation, right? So we just need to keep the mind and the body active, and we will definitely get through this all together. And so with that, and as a courtesy to all of you, I had a brief slide here to share my background. I think Blas already did a good job, so I'll keep this very simple and straightforward, right? I am helping with go-to-market strategy and evangelization for the IBM Cloud for our business partners and alliances for IBM Cloud for North America. Outside of IBM, I am a technologist, strategist. I'm a speaker, investor, a world traveler. I also am a fitness aficionado and keep a few other hobbies like skateboarding that I have kept over the many years. So, from an education perspective, I have a degree in communication. I have an MBA in international management and a series of post-MBA certifications in leadership management and so on. As Blas shared, I've had the opportunity to work for some great companies. I joined IBM about 5 years ago, where I've had very different roles at the market level, at the North America level, as well as the global leadership level for our strategy, execution, and sales within the IBM Cloud. On another brief personal note, I've lived in multiple cities across the United States. I lived in Mexico City for many years. I grew up there, actually. Lived in the Silicon Valley for a couple of years. I'm here in Los Angeles now, happily. And, well, that's a little bit about me and my background. And now our agenda, very straightforward. I'll touch on some of the actions that we're taking at IBM to help our employees and our clients and the community overall on these times. Then I'll talk about rethinking supply chains and business ecosystems and changing business models in this new reality that we are all facing. And I will close with what is my point of view, that it is not in spite of the challenge, but it is the challenge what gives us the opportunity. And there is a lot of opportunity at multiple levels in this environment. And so with that, Starting with IBM, I want to share, I'm truly very, very humbled and proud to be a part of a company like IBM, which is focused on doing what is right. So in these times, priority number one is protecting the well-being of all of our employees, right? We have supported all the government guidelines. We have everyone working remotely. And I'm talking about 400,000 people around the world in more than 190 countries, right? People went home, and we only keep people who are having critical functions supporting our infrastructure, our cloud data centers, which are supporting very critical functions across industries for banks to process transactions, for healthcare companies to share data, and really across all industries, right? So we have some critical functions that need to be physical still, but other than that, everyone is working from home. Then in doing what's right for our clients and our business partners, again, the principle there is doing first what's ethical ahead of trying to take any opportunistic financial advantage of the situation. So I'll share a little bit more on what we're doing there. And then also, of course, contributing our resources and our expertise to help fight this global crisis. Some other actions that we've taken on these fronts is immediately, this is all about the speed and being able to adapt, right? What we all need to do. So massive events like IBM Think, for example, coming in May, we were expecting many thousands of clients in San Francisco. We changed the entire format, moved it to a digital event, which, by the way, now is free for everyone to access. So you can go Google it and go and join us for IBM Think for free in May 5th to May 8th. And we transformed many other events, right? I was supposed to be in Singapore last month for some internal enablement for 5,000 IBMers there. That certainly didn't happen, but we're doing it remotely, right? All of our webinars for clients and so on. So we've adapted on that front. Now, specifically on fighting the COVID-19, some of the actions that we've taken is IBM has already donated over $200 million in technology, and some of the three key areas where we've contributed to fight the COVID-19 is number one, we created the Supercomputing Consortium using IBM Summit. For those of you who may not know about it, IBM Summit is the largest, fastest supercomputer in the world that we launched about 2 years ago. So we're using it. We created a consortium. We have about 19 different partners now, about 14 of the top most renowned scientists working with us, leveraging the computational power of Summit to do research and helping accelerate the path towards finding a vaccine, which is what we need in the world to finally go back to stopping the social distancing and go back to a relatively normal life, right? So that's action number one, the Supercomputing Consortium that we are donating the computing power from Summit. Number two, the Weather Company, which is an IBM asset. IBM owns the assets of the Weather Company. So we're using it for now with government to allow for citizens to know of incidents of COVID-19 in their specific town or community. Right? So just providing that service with coordinating with governments for use for citizens to use it. We have already more than 25 million users in the United States, and then we're going to be rolling this out globally. And then the third action is with Watson Assistant. We created a chat. So Watson is our artificial intelligence branding, right? And so we created a chatbot to answer health-related questions, again, for citizens, coordinating these with governments already across 50 states in the United States, and then that should be rolled out globally as well. So these are three very specific actions where we are contributing, again, our resources and expertise to do what is right and help fight this crisis. Specifically with our clients, to the point of not taking any opportunistic financial advantage, right? Companies more than ever need collaboration resources. So thank you for the reminder. So with that, we have made available for for 90 days 9 key technologies that will help our clients with their collaboration and with this transformation that they need to go through very rapidly, right? That includes our cloud platform with more than 190 services, Aspera for file transfer, and so on. Sterling, right, for changing supply chains. Things like restaurants that now need to go to a model of buy online and then pick up in store. So companies can use these resources for free for 90 days. And in the spirit of keeping it fast, one last action that we're taking is we partnered with this organization called Global Citizen on a charitable campaign supported by IBM as well as by IBM employees. And this is supporting the Solidarity Fund for the World Health Organization to fight COVID-19. This whole thing will end with a concert that called One World. And it's a free concert. You guys can join it. There is a link that I put there at the bottom of the PowerPoint. Or you can just Google it, right? On April 18th, we'll have, artists like Alanis Morissette, Andrea Bocelli, Elton John, Stevie Wonder, and many more, right? Hosted by Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel, and who else? And Stephen Colbert. So this is another very good initiative, and also helping keep people entertained at the end now that people are having more time at home. So those are some of the initiatives that we're working on. Moving on from IBM to the broader situation in what's happening and how companies will need to adapt, right? The key theme here, rethinking supply chains and business ecosystem. Important to understand this is not a temporary thing. I guess that's clear to everyone. This is the new reality that we're living in. But I just want to establish something very important. Yes, COVID-19 is something new and it caught everyone off guard, but disruption is not new. It's something that has been here for many years, specifically business disruption has happened for many, many, many years, and it's not new to us. So we have some very good examples on what has happened in the past. So if you look at this chart, more than 50% of the Fortune 500 companies go out of business in about 10 years, and that has been happening for the past many years, right? So think about that. Those are the largest, most stable, most profitable companies in the world, and about 50% of them go out of business or get acquired or file for bankruptcy in a period of just 10 years. And actually, this is happening, and it has happened across all industries, and this is because some of these guys that you all may know, right, what is become known as the Uber effect. The largest transportation company doesn't own any cars. Or Airbnb, one of the largest accommodation companies that doesn't own any real estate. And, retailers like Amazon that came and disrupted companies like Sears and many others, and also many smaller retailers. Netflix that disrupted companies that were very strong, like Tower Records many years ago, because they weren't able to adapt and transform themselves rapidly. So disruption has always been here, and we definitely can transform. And the people, the companies that are able to transform fast, to rethink the way they do business and come up with different ways of doing it, are going to be able to take advantage of this crisis and come out stronger, right? And so the question is, what do all of these guys that you see here have in common? All of them, well, number one, neither of them existed 20 years ago, right? All of them are new companies. But all of them are digitally ready or digitally native companies. And all of them have digital platforms. And that's a very important point that I will touch on. Just to close on this point on disruption over time, when you go back to the original Fortune 500 list, those 500 strongest companies in the world just 70 years ago, only 10% of them have survived over that relatively small period of time, 70 years. Only 50 of the original Fortune 500 still remain in the list. So disruption has happened for many, many, many years. And the way to come strong out of a disruptive scenario like the one we're living today, one of the ways, number one, is, as I mentioned, is creating a platform, right? A platform through which you can integrate your supply chains and create a business ecosystem. And so the way this works is that with a platform, you collect data from your clients, data that you can reuse, leveraging algorithms. And with those two combined, you can produce much better client experiences, which will lead to, increase usage, right? And this creates a virtuous cycle of leveraging data and leveraging those platforms to create a stronger business ecosystem. But of course, not everyone can create a digital platform, depending on your business model and depending on your industry and many other things. So going ahead to the point of the challenge is the opportunity, right? Let's see what some of the companies, some of the big players are doing, right? And again, it's very important to see how companies react in these times, right? Doing well by doing what's right. So companies like Sarah, making and donating over 300,000 masks. The Louis Vuitton Consortium, transforming their factories for luxury perfumes and creating hand sanitizer and donating it. Companies like PG&E, again, donating hand sanitizer, or Lego, helping, for children that are now at home with play, learn by play. Companies like Pepsi, donating meals and critical supplies, and many more, many more. I share what IBM is doing. Many other technology companies are contributing, right? Cisco, Tata, Google, and so on. So many of the big players are doing that. But then, of course, there are the small players that don't have the leverage, the resources. Many of these companies are day to day. I mean, the restaurants are having an extremely tough time. So there is still a question. There are restaurants that have decided to just close doors. There are others that have adapted, right? And they've done it fast. And that's part of that fast digital transformation, creating that digital way to connect with their clients and remain valid. Some restaurants have actually gone further and started donating meals to the people in most need in their communities. And those are things that are appreciated on the long term. And when this passes, because it will pass, they will be very strongly positioned. But all companies are needing to rethink the way they've done their business, right? Manufacturers, museums that now are offering digital tours. What's going to happen after the quarantine? It's not going to everything going to normal immediately. There's going to be a process and transition. Will museums continue offering virtual tours? What about education? Education had already been disrupted by companies like Khan Academy and Udemy, offering very high quality content. So now educational institutions will have to transform themselves. Some of them, like Harvard and Stanford, are already since time ago offering online education high quality. So industries, entire industries will have to transform, right? The entertainment industry, imagine how affected they are. And they will have to, again, think in very different ways how they will now serve their clients. And this means having to look for different suppliers, for different vendors, having to perhaps source locally, having to perhaps completely change the offerings that they have. So companies will have to transform very, very rapidly. And that's what we all are facing, right? Across all industries. It's about being able to rethink the way we've done things. And so the very, very key question here, the most important question perhaps of these few minutes that I have here with you guys is, how are you specifically for your business rethinking on this reinvention for your business and your business model, right? Your supply chain. And so, of course, I wouldn't attempt to try to tell anyone what to do. I'm just sharing some perspective. But in that sharing of perspective, there are a few critical questions, right? The number one is, have you in your business started to actively think on how you can replace your entire business model? What would be that new business model in which you could continue serving your clients? That's one question that I want you to think about. The second question is, are you already working on projects that go completely outside of your main business, of your main source of revenue, something completely different? If you are not doing it, I invite you to start having a discussion with your leadership about which different businesses you can be launching based on the changing environment to come out of this crisis strong, right? And it can be something completely different from what you're doing today. And those companies that have the ability to transform are the ones that survive, right? And that's why IBM is in business after 100 years, because we have transformed in every way. We've evolved our business. That's why we're selling artificial intelligence and blockchain and quantum computing and not punching machines 100 years later. That's what keeps our company in business. And that leads me to the last and very important question, which in other talks that I like to give and that I've given in different forums about innovation and disruptive innovation, the question for you is, do you understand the real, and highlighting real, need that you're solving for your clients? And what I mean by that is thinking back to companies that were very strongly positioned, were leaders in their business, like Tower Records. They didn't understand the real problem they were solving. They thought that what they were doing is selling long plays or CDs or tapes. That's not what they were doing. Their business was bringing music to people. And as the industry and technologies changed, they missed that boat and someone else capitalized on that. And now they're out of business. So understand what is the real need that you're serving. Don't focus on your product. Focus on what is the problem that you're solving for your clients, and ask yourself if you can do it in a very, very different way. I feel like I have to rush a little bit through all the points. Limited time. I hope this was valuable to all of you guys. There will be much more to cover, but this is the time that we have allocated for this. So I hope this was valuable and useful to all of you. I would like to close on a light note, right? And for all of you in the United States that might have been familiar with this marketing campaign, I want to tell you, stay thirsty for reinvention, my friends. And with that, that was a campaign for the beer Dos Equis, with the most interesting man in the world there. Anyway, light and fun note to close. Thank you very much for your time and attention. And we'll come out of this very strong. Cheers, and thank you to the Silicon Valley Innovation Center.
So the question is, how do we handle the peak bandwidth when clients demand so much from us, but our vendors and maybe our employees are not ready yet? How would you handle this?
So thank you, and that's a great and actually complex question that has many dimensions and angles, right? And may certainly vary from industry to industry depending on your business. So specifically, you mentioned IBM. So for a point of example, right? Fortunately, IBM and I think many other core technology companies, fortunately, we are strongly positioned to handle a crisis in a situation like this, precisely because we already have that digital business enabled. So again, people like myself, we're already working remotely with all of the technology, all this collaboration software and so on, both internal and external. So again, technology companies like IBM are really very strongly positioned to go through a situation like this. But I think what is relevant to others here who perhaps are not a core technology company, right? How do you go through that transformation? And so again, this would be a long and complex process, but first you need to look at your business model, right? And from all of those elements on that business model, you need to reconsider, for example, what was considered to be a critical face-to-face interaction right now that we're in this social distancing time, and change roles, right? People that we really consider that really, really needed to be, in the office, for development teams to collaborate face-to-face. Well, guess what? You may be able to rethink that and realize that that was really not necessarily critical. So start changing rapidly those things that now can become a bottleneck for operational capacity, right? And to transform that, review your business model, review your processes, and be able to transform, and then definitely go digital, right? So things that you're doing manually, you need to automate them. And for that, I guess this is not the time to create a platform in time of urgency, but go and acquire platforms from companies like IBM and others that are there that can help you automate your business. And I'll pause there to see if there is follow-up or other questions.
Yeah, thanks. And the last question, really quick. So we all know that remote work is trending right now. Remote work is something that's happening right now, right? But what can we do all as the next step, right? Because we're kind of already in this situation. What do you think? What would you suggest that the companies should do to prepare themselves to exit from this crisis, to start emerging? What is like the next thing so they can stay a little bit ahead of the curve?
Yes. So, based on your question related to remote working, right? Yeah, many companies definitely were not ready for that. And again, this can vary from industry to industry, the requirements and the needs, right? But what I showed in some of these examples of some of these large companies, like Louis Vuitton, for example, right? What they did is that they recognized there is a need in the marketplace and that they can do a social service by creating this hand sanitizer instead of right now manufacturing high-end perfumes. So they recognized a need in the marketplace that is ethical for the world. It's the ethical thing to do what is needed. But at the same time, even though they are donating what they're doing right now, but they are being able to keep their employees working. So that has many, many levels of positive implications, and hopefully nobody would and should do that for public relationships benefit, but it does have a public relationships benefit, right? The marketplace notices. So what I'm telling you is not everybody has the resources of a large Fortune 500 company like Louis Vuitton, but even a small company recognize what is the opportunity that may not be what you're doing, but where you can leverage your infrastructure. Again, if you're a restaurant, you may turn it into something completely different. If you're manufacturing clothes, you may shift and start building masks, right? The face masks, which many people are doing already. And then there are many other examples that go beyond the hand sanitizer and the mask. There are many other needs out there, right? Hotels may convert into temporary clinics. There are so many, or clinics for people who don't have like critical needs, or for other procedures that are not urgent or not related to COVID-19. So there are many, many ways where companies can see the situation, identify the needs of the marketplace, and instead of trying to fit the world to the little product, they need to empty their mind, see what's the reality of the world, and see how they can fit the resources that they have, their skills, their people, their expertise, their infrastructure, their assets, to provide what's needed in the world. That is the key. And the key is you need to be able to change. The companies that win in this world are not the biggest ones. We've seen large companies, very large companies, go down. So it's not the biggest ones or the wealthiest ones. It's the fastest ones to adapt. It goes back to Darwin, and I'm a Darwinian, right? It's about evolution. The companies that are able to adapt to a changing environment, as well as the individuals, are the ones that are going to survive and are the ones that are going to come strong out of this and all the future crises that will come, and we will overcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Pavel, and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your time and attention. My pleasure.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussions right now. We have Jeffrey Hausfeld, the Chief Medical Officer of the Biofactura. We have Jonathan Lapchik, the CEO of Suku, the Citizens Reserve, and we have Scott Mavias, who's the Director at the Microsoft. So Scott Mavias is Director of AI and Global Partnerships for Microsoft Philanthropics, where he leads new initiatives to identify and jointly invest in social impact projects with Microsoft's largest customers and partners. Scott is a 20-year Microsoft veteran with leadership roles in consulting, technical architecture, corporate innovation, sales, smart cities, and now philanthropy. Jonathan is a blockchain specialist with a strong business technology background. He's currently CEO of Suku, supply chain as a service ecosystem that aims to transform global supply chain. And Jeffrey is a chairman of the board and chief medical officer at Biofactura. He is a retired medical practitioner with a deep experience in finance, real estate, medicine, diagnostic devices, and health IT. And without further ado, I'm switching to our panelists. Brad, hello everyone. I think we're live. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. I know that you're located in the different geographic regions, so it is good that we can all be together. So let's probably start with a small introduction. I did a little bit of the canned presentation for each and every one of you. Since we have Jeffrey right now on the screen, could you please start with yourself? Just kind of introduce yourself, really brief, and some of your expertise and how you involved in the global pandemics and how you involved in the general things that are changing right now.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jeff Hausfeld. I am a surgeon by training. I did my training in otolaryngology, facial plastic, and reconstructive surgery at Yale and practiced in the Washington, D.C. area for 25 years. Followed up with an MBA at Hopkins and a degree of organizational development at George Washington University. Stopped my practice about 15 years ago to become a full-time entrepreneur. Started a non-for-profit called the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, which I'm hoping that many of our members are listening today, because our mission is to help innovators bring their new ideas and innovations from their head to patients. On this journey, I became involved in the biotech company, a local biotech company here in the Washington, D.C. area, that has specializations in both biodefense and biosimilars. The name of the company is Biofactura, and we just received a $68 million contract with BARDA to do the research and development and production of a monoclonal antibody cocktail for smallpox as a therapeutic for a potential bioterrorism event in the world and in the United States. So we are very involved with antivirals and the production of antivirals, and continue to place a big part of our technology in making sure that we can bring these therapeutics to market both efficiently and at scale.
Thank you. And Jonathan, you're next.
Thank you for the invite, first of all. My name is Jonathan Lapchik. I'm the CEO of Suku. We are a company out of Silicon Valley. Our focus is on building traceability solutions as a way to help brands and retailers sell more and sell better products, but also helping our network of suppliers to provide them with access to financial tools. During that process, the majority of us have actually come from the Deloitte blockchain lab in New York. We've been working for the last 6-7 years in blockchain. So we've been building a suite of solutions around traceability and the connection between physical and digital worlds, traceability and the data that we generate when the assets move, and concepts around authenticity. It was a couple of weeks ago where we received a call from one of our partners, and they were looking to use us to help with the pandemic, and we wanted to help, and we've been spending some time to think how we can help with the solutions that we have with the problems that we see today. And that's where we decided to implement and to customize a solution that we had around traceability and around data platform for the tags that we use with our partner SmartTrack, which is one of the biggest manufacturers in the world of NFC. And we are now creating a solution for test kits, for any test kits that are going to be in the market in the next several weeks, and some that are in the market already here in the US and globally, to attach an NFC to every tag, to every kit for patients to scan to report the results. So you will receive the test kit, someone can assist you or not, and depending on which country, and you'll be able to scan it with your phone, report, submit a picture of the result, and then you will receive a step-by-step guide on how to address and how to go through if you are positive. That creates three things. The first one is good data, good real-time data for governments and officials to see positive results in real time from all these tests, to make better decisions, allocating doctors, allocating more resources to specific facilities in specific neighborhoods. The second one is we think we are going to help to reduce the number of people that will go to hospitals for assistance, because now we created an online help and online channel to assist you if you're positive. And third, as we look forward to getting back to work, our idea is to provide the necessary information to help officials issue immunity certificates with the test that we are scanning and that people are reporting to. So overall, creating a brain using blockchain, secure, anonymous data, with the entire suite of solutions that we have, getting really good traction and interest from governments and labs. So excited to be here and sharing our experience.
All right, Scott.
Hey, good day, evening, whatever time zone you all are in. I hope you're all staying healthy and safe. As mentioned earlier, I look after AI and global partnerships at Microsoft. I'm based in San Francisco, but for the past few weeks, I've been sheltering in place at a cabin up in Tahoe. If you look across my portfolio of projects, probably the most relevant stuff I work on for this conversation is our AI for Good program. So those fall into AI for Earth, which is around sustainability, AI for humanitarian action, largely refugee flows, migrants, and human rights, accessibility, which is around assistive tech for people with disabilities, and our AI for Health program, which I suspect we'll be talking mainly about today. All those programs are really premised on the idea that we're not going to be able to solve today's challenges without AI, without harnessing data and computing power to really understand the complexity of all these interconnected systems. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have going forward with the other panelists. So thanks all.
Thank you. So the first question is that a lot of people are calling this global pandemic a black swan event, right? But what is personal to us is one thing that is not necessarily present here is the backward explainability. That usually when you have a black swan event and you can look back, let's say a year or 2 years from now, you can kind of see, okay, that was coming. That was something that was imminent. We had some different assumptions. We did some different things. We thought different things back then. But with this one, and I will probably start with Jeffrey and then go to Scott. Do you think from the medical perspective, as a medical community and as an entrepreneurial community, we could have predicted or could have prepared better? And if we could have, what was the assumptions that, what stopped us from actually implementing those changes? So Jeffrey, I will go to you on that.
Well, if you heard Bill Gates talk about this about 5 years ago, he basically predicted and laid out exactly what was about, what's happening now. So did we listen to people like Bill? No, we really did not. And we really did not take the proper precautions, both as a country and as a global biopharmaceutical network to build up the capacity and the infrastructure to deal with a pandemic. We have little isolated silos, but they are not interconnected. They are not cooperative, and they did not really plan for this kind of massive attack on multiple regions that could devastate both life and economies.
Scott?
Yeah, I agree with that to some extent. This is Scott. I don't think this is unpredictable. We've been having plagues and pandemics have been a scourge of humanity forever. So we know these happen intermittently. The challenge is that they haven't previously been able to predict. You can imagine that we're getting at the cusp of being able to bioscience, medical science is getting closer to being able to understand virology, and we could talk a bit more about some things that Microsoft is doing in that case. I think what is challenging here is that they're very expensive outside of the science end. Society, it's very difficult and expensive to prepare for society for that. Essentially, you're investing in a lot of resources that sit unused. And so that's hard to justify from a societal standpoint. And I think also our modern society has become much more interconnected, both in these little tubes that fly around at 40,000 feet and are great virus dispersion mechanisms, as well as the interconnectedness of business and the move to just-in-time supply chains. So when you're running paper-thin supply chains and they get disrupted, those cascade very quickly. So I don't think this was unpredictable. I think we just prioritized other things to prepare for.
So Jonathan, on that front, when we're talking about the supply chain and when we're talking about those disruptions, you being in supply chain, have you actually looked into those problems? Have you actually had a scenario when you were working through your business where, all right, everything's going to stop? How do you handle that? Was it one of the scenarios that you were working through?
Yeah, I think the issue is not so much if we can think if we could have done something different to prevent it or anticipate it. I think obviously for us, we are a technology company, and we could have never anticipated that. I think it's how quick we react and how do we take the signals that we get from the market and from other countries. I think it took us a lot of time to actually react and say, this is serious, we need to do something. And we have seen it with clients, we have seen it with partners. They took a lot of time to understand and put the energy to really get through the details of what was going on to build some of these contingency plans. And now everything is reaction. There's no the proactiveness. Everything is chaos. And I think on our side, we've seen those signals a couple months ago. We didn't know how profound it was going to be, and right now we're trying to help. And I think this is something that every single technology company will need to do, to look inside what do they have and look at many of the problems that we're seeing in supply chain. And for us, we always say that supply chain is everything. Like commerce is driven by the way we interact with countries, with suppliers, with vendors, and supply chain is driving everything today. Is at the core of every human issue and commerce and business issue that we have. So it seems like everyone should be able to add a little bit of what they have into this problem. It's just a matter of taking the time to do it, and by helping others, they will be helping themselves, and that's what we've been trying to do with the solution that we built.
Yeah, definitely. So,
Scott, even though we do not have a global coordinated effort amongst biopharmaceutical firms, you can see that there is an accelerated effort on individual firms and now on a global scale to really try to advance both therapeutics and vaccines in a race to a cure, in a way that we have never seen before, and that will really allow us to have the tools to allow society to come back to normal function in a much shorter period of time than it usually takes.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with the sort of the uncoordinated response. It is a bunch of disparate silos and how people are jumping together. I'm a technologist, I'm a liberal arts guy by background. So I'm not deep in the science at all, but from the layperson's perspective, I've been really impressed with the knowledge sharing, the publish first, figure out, share data first, get it out there. so that other people can build on it. The previous conversation before this panel, I caught the very end of it while a gentleman from IBM, they helped spearhead a project with the White House and OSTP that is really brought together all of the hyper cloud providers. So Amazon, Microsoft, Google, NVIDIA, AMD are providing hardware. Let me get to the stats here. I wrote them down. It's amazing. Sort of the HPC project. So they brought to bear 400 petaflops of computing power, 100,000 nodes, 3.5 million CPUs, and 41,000 GPUs that have been harnessed across the private sector. The national labs are all bringing in resources. And so there's all the science end of it that I watch but don't understand. I am privy to the sort of the tech community throwing all the resources that we have at it to help the computational biologists, to help the people that are doing genomic analysis, to have all the resources, the computational resources they can bring together. These are companies that don't have, we collaborate on industry consortiums, but we don't have good ways of sharing compute resources rapidly. And this was brought together like over a weekend, a week and a half or so ago. So the mobilization of society to work together quickly. And so I agree with that comment. I'm quite impressed with it.
So on that front, right? What seems interesting to me that it seems finally we are at this innovation, at this experimentation, this delivery stage where we always have been kind of a little bit held back, right? We always had concerns. We always were kind of pulled back by the reality. And now finally we're innovating with such speed that I think that was never ever seen before. So question to all of you, and I'll start with Jonathan. What do you think fundamentally changed in the ways that we innovate right now? And do you think this momentum, do you think this a more Silicon Valley approach, if you allow to say this, will it actually go into the future, and will it keep this innovation at the same pace, but maybe not so focused, but just in general, the way we accept new technologies, the way we accept new things, even they might not be perfect? Do you think it will proliferate throughout this crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. And from our experience, we received the call from our partner on a Friday night, and on Monday morning, we had the solution ready. We spent, I don't know how many hours going through that. So that proves that when we are in a hurry, that we have the sense of urgency. We are really not looking for perfection. We're looking for delivery. We're looking for getting it done. And when you have that sense of urgency, that's when you look for collaboration. That's where you look for lean processes and being able to just deliver, not being stuck on discussions on theories or trying to see what are the scenarios. It's just go do it, fail quickly, and try to iterate as much as you can. So I think that's the approach that we've been taking in our startup for since we began. And I think that's also the Silicon Valley approach. And we are seeing that through the medical space. Obviously, it has the regulatory and processes that we need to go through, and that obviously delays, for the good reasons, the process. But I think we are in that phase where everyone is trying to look to collaborate and getting things done in a very thin and lean process. And I think that's the right approach. That's the only way that something like this is going to work in with this urgency.
Thank you. And
yeah, I was going to jump in on that. I agree that it shows what is possible, but I'm not sure I disagree, or just taking a different angle on to the question of will things change going forward. This isn't a sustainable innovation model. We are figuring. We know that we're throwing all these resources at a global challenge that is short term. No one is thinking about how we could possibly sustain this level of innovation. No one is sort of talking about how we could do, what is the governance mechanisms around this? How do we fund this over time? How do we make sure we adhere to local laws? How do we adhere to local customs? How do we make sure that there are sustained engineering teams around this? Because we know this is a short-term expenditure of resources to focus on a very specific problem. I don't imagine that a year from now, 2 years from now, when we're past this crisis, that we're going to be able to see the same level of sustained focus, because it's very different when you're building a product, building a solution that you're trying to innovate and figure out how to make it work, than if you're building a business that you're trying to sustain over multiple years. It's just different resources, different assets to bring to bear. And all of those sustainability resources, no one's bringing to the table right now, because it doesn't matter. We're solving today's problem right now. We'll dig ourselves out from the sort of the resource misallocation later.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And then, Jeffrey, to you, being having a medical background, how do you think we can balance, right, this innovation with the regulations? And when Jonathan said is that fail fast in the business world might be a good thing, but fail fast in medicine might be actually a traumatic thing. So how do you think we can balance some of that innovation with the cost of the failure, and how can we create this sustainable ecosystem to what you, Scott, said, or how we can balance all of those things together going long term?
This is really where the fields of technology and medicine diverge from each other.
Yes.
So in technology, you can ramp up very quickly and you can deploy the minimum viable product to get some results that will be helpful and hopefully not harmful. In medicine, it's very difficult to do that, because in medicine, if we skip places in the process of developing a diagnostic, or in developing a vaccine, or in developing a therapeutic, then what you may wind up is with inadvertent consequences that cause disease, that cause death. And sometimes you wind up looking at something that had great promise, but really is not usable in patients. So whereas, what we're looking at now, from everything that you have in diagnostics, that's the first thing we need. We need to be able to diagnose, does a person have the virus? How quickly can we make this diagnostic test work? So you're not going to take 10 days to get a result. In 10 days, it's over already. You need to know before that. So we have to have rapid diagnostics. You have to be able to test if people have antibodies in their system, if they've been exposed to the virus and they have antibodies where they can return to work and not be afraid to go back to work. Those alone are huge hurdles that we have to undertake. And what you're seeing now is emergency use authorization, where the FDA has said, okay, show me proof of concept, show me that your test is at least works, is somewhat reliable, and we'll forego the huge clinical trial that we usually have to impose to make sure that trying this in 100 or 500 or 1,000 people, really, that you can use it in the general population. That's what we're missing now. So you'll see a lot of tests that will have too many false positives and too many false negatives. So it's, even though we're using these tests, they may not be as accurate as they need to be in the future. But for now, it's a stopgap measure. We can use it. Now take that to the therapeutic world, and it becomes an even bigger problem, because now you're not just taking tests to see whether or not someone is positive or negative. Now you're giving someone an intervention that could be life-changing. Life-changing in that you may save their lives, but you may also, hasten their death. So everything that you said is very true, but in medicine, first thing, we do no harm. So you can rush at a certain pace, but if you rush too fast, you will fall and falter and not be sustainable in the long run.
So,
can I say something? Can I add something? And Jeff, I fully agree with everything you said. And this is just as an outsider, without having any knowledge on the healthcare industry, just an outsider, and intuitively, someone would say, if we put all the resources in the world from every single company that's been involved in the healthcare industry to work on a vaccine, right, you would think that we will have something earlier than 12 months or even 6 months, right? That's my engineering head that will tell you, if we put all the engineers in the world to work on one very, very complex problem, and we need to make sure that we go through multiple tests to confirm that it works, we can change the world in I don't know, in 1 month if we put all the research. So there's something that without having that background, without having all the information, I might probably be wrong. There's something that's not clicking on the speed to market to actually release something that it will change the world and will benefit everyone. So that's the point where I still don't get. Maybe it's misinformation, but it doesn't click.
Okay, so there are certain technical things that you have to understand when you're dealing with therapeutics. Let's talk about an antibody therapeutic first. So in order to find an antibody therapeutic, you can do two things. You can take a person that has had the coronavirus and take the antibodies that they have circulating in their blood and give another patient their plasma that is compatible with their blood type, and then they would have some sort of immunity, maybe. But that's not scalable because you're taking one person and giving it to one person. So you have to think of the general society, and that's not going to work in terms of a scalable solution. So in order to really mass produce antibodies, there's a process that you have to find the antibody amongst tens of thousands of cells of B cells, white blood cells in the person's body that make that specific antibody that will attack the coronavirus and neutralize it and not allow it to function or not allow it to be transmissible. That in and of itself takes some time when you're sifting through tens of thousands of potential candidates. And then when you find one, then you have to basically re-engineer it so that you're making another living cell make that antibody. You're transfecting that cell with the code, with the DNA code that says, make this protein. And it may not make it correctly the first time, or it may make a variation of it that is immunogenic, that people will react to. So all these things, they're not snap your fingers and it happens. It takes years to develop these in real time. Now, we can compress it, and we can really, if you have a lot of smart people like we do now, we can get a therapeutic out on the market probably in less than a year. And that's fantastic. But when people say, why can't you do it in a month? It's just not practical and it's not safe. With vaccines, it takes a little longer because with a vaccine, what you're trying to do is make the body have a immune response so that when it sees this coronavirus again, it will basically neutralize the coronavirus so you don't get sick. But sometimes if you can make that person have that reaction, it can have an overreaction when it sees that coronavirus again. And that enhanced reaction is what we have to test for. And the only way to test for it is time. You have to give the body time to see the vaccine and then to see that antigen at another time interval to see what the response will be. So that's the difficulty, is that you're dealing with biological organisms that require time to see what the therapy and what the effect of that therapy is over a prolonged period of time.
Jeffrey, so thanks so much on this. But then, again, us as entrepreneurs, and I think we have a great panel because we have a small startup, we have an established tech giant, and we have a great medical firm present at the same time. But what do you think is some of those best lessons that we can learn from this innovation that is happening right now? And how can we take this innovation on the next stage to make it more sustainable, to make it more everyday life without the crisis happening around us? And I guess it's a question to all of you on the level of your organization.
So I'll jump in. I think the learnings from this, what the conversation we just had around the divergence between medical science and computer science, they absolutely diverge, but that doesn't mean in this cases that they aren't complementary. So medical science has a realm of things that they can go solve that maybe they can use computation to solve more quickly, but ultimately it's a different domain. On the computational science, there's a lot of other things in this epidemic that we can throw our resources at that medical science probably is not as efficient at. So we can do better prediction around resource allocation because we can do modeling around that and be able to figure out cost of resources, use a wide variety of data sets to determine how we should allocate these scarce resources. Being able to do data insights around misinformation and help better track so that people get good information on that, bringing in economic costs. So there's things that we can do in that space. How we make this more sustainable is, I think what we can do is the connections that we're making between organizations, different medical clinics, different technology companies, different parts of the business community that haven't worked together, that just building these collaborative links are things that we will benefit from in the long term. No, I don't believe this rate is sustainable because we're throwing everything we have at it and we're throwing caution to the wind in a lot of ways. But ultimately, innovation comes from disparate fields speaking to one another and seeing a really interesting overlap and saying, oh, here is a new field of study, let's go push that. So we are really we're building new relationships, new collaboration capital that we can deploy to future problems. So we'll see more innovation coming from that just because we're going to do innovation better, not that we're going to do it faster.
Scott, I couldn't agree with you more. And that was one of the reasons that I co-founded the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. Most of the people that belong to that organization are not doctors. We have computer scientists, we have software engineers, you have hardware engineers, you have biopharmaceutical people, you have regulatory people. And it really is this ecosystem that we create in each of the cities that we have chapters in to develop the kind of community that can drive innovation. Understanding that doctors are smart and we understand what we have in our toolkit and we understand what we'll use and what our patients need, but we cannot do this alone.
Yeah, a great example of this is 15 years, probably maybe 20 years old at Microsoft. When we were, right after we bought Hotmail, we spent a bunch of time trying to defeat spam, little minor changes in how people got past our spam filters. And a random discussion between one of our computer scientists and one of our medical doctors, and they kind of realized that HIV and spam mutated at a similar rates and in similar ways, and essentially protected whatever the core bad stuff is in the HIV virus. And so they built a computational model to analyze boatloads of spam and boatloads of the genome of HIV. And for years, that was the top cited research piece in HIV research, coming from Microsoft of all things. We're not in that space, but that's that chance interaction between two people with different disciplines that see an overlap and can go solve a unique problem. So we're building that connective tissue now in this crisis. So we're going to, I imagine that 5-10 years out, you're going to have a lot of really wacky collaborations over people that met over some online forum fighting COVID, and they're going to solve some brand new problem that we can't even imagine.
I'm gonna just a couple things. Nothing new, but I think the first one is that timing is absolutely everything. That's the first thing that we learn about this, and everyone learned same lessons. So timing is everything, and now more than ever. And the second one is that data is king, and truly the amount of lack of data and asymmetry of information that we're seeing across the globe, like you would think that we are collaborating in many different ways, but data is always the component where either we don't trust, or that we're not getting in real time, or it's not solid. So I think those are the two lessons learned for us, and we are trying to cover those and help with those two.
Yeah. So then the question becomes, right, is that as Scott, to what you said, how do you think we can still keep this innovation? How we can still look at those things? How we can still transform as we go through with all this crisis, while we're really focused on, again, some people are fighting to get the revenue, some people are trying to keep their employees busy and employed. How do you think we can, with the example that you have provided, and it's obviously a question to all of us, how can we focus on still innovation being transformative while we're pretty much fighting for our lives, both personal and professional?
Well, and I guess if I'm a believer that innovation happens. There isn't pixie dust that you can sprinkle and say, "Oh, go be more innovative." Innovation comes from dissimilar, as I said earlier, dissimilar people interacting and coming up with novel ideas. As I talked about, we're seeding that. So we're creating the basis to create more innovation. But the rate, I just don't think the rate is going to go up. We're going to have more and better of it, but we're all going to go back to our day jobs at some point. And we're going to be focused on running our businesses. We're going to be focused on making communities better. We're going to be focused on creating new advances. We can't be on this war footing indefinitely.
Yeah.
I agree, Scott. And the things that really limit innovation are both human capital and financial capital.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the people to work on innovative ideas because they have day jobs, it's really hard to push it at this level. And when you do have the people that are interested in being entrepreneurs and innovators, financing and funding is always a major roadblock because so many, especially in biotech, fail early. But it costs a lot of money to get to that point.
Yeah. So
and adding that, there's human capital, financial capital, and marketability and a marketplace. So there can be great innovation that just has no marketplace for it. And so we've kind of thrown the market out. One, because the market's collapsed, but two, there's an existential problem that everyone is focused on. So we don't really have to worry about what's the revenue model that is going forward.
Right.
5 years from now, innovation is going to have to be funded around, does someone want to buy this?
Not 5 years from now, Scott. That's today. So
correct. I know, but well, right now we have yes, but I'm thinking of in the COVID example, we're not, we're solving an existential problem. No one's building revenue models. I'm sure people are building revenue models, but a lot of the resources being thrown at it are not market constrained. They will be in 5 years or 2 years or whenever we stop being on this war foot.
Yeah. So
yes.
So
I think it's the same thing, just different angles.
Yeah. So let me add to that, right? So besides human capital, besides financial capital, besides marketability, I think what also kind of became very apparent is that our supply chains, both to us, be it a suppliers of goods, be it suppliers of the intellectual capital as our employees, be it providers of some physical goods, but not only this, but also the supply chain to our customers, right? Delivering those kits, delivering those physical solutions. We cannot have everything virtual. We need to have something physical actually affects the way we're going forward and the way we will be thinking. So do you think that there is some kind of rethinking in minds of the business leaders and in your minds on how we can deliver the goods to the end customers and how we can create the system that is robust to this physical interruption that is happening throughout the world?
So that's one of the lessons that we learn from this experience is that, okay, we now understand that pandemics are really bad in terms of loss of life and in terms of devastation to our economies on a global scale. What you've also learned is that there is very little sharing of scarce resources when everyone is desperate to help their own citizenry. So that you see that amongst the individual states in the United States, but look at countries throughout the world, the sharing of these scarce resources is really very limited because everyone is trying to take care of their own. So we have to look at that and say, how do we try to solve for that without spending trillions of dollars in stockpiles that will sit disregarded for many years until the next pandemic? Well, some of it is anticipatory thinking. And that has very much to do with the biodefense world and the smallpox therapeutic that we're making now for the United States government, because people can make a smallpox bioweapon And we need to have therapeutics because that doesn't have a 1% mortality, that has a 30% mortality. That will kill tens of hundreds of millions of people globally. And so people aren't going to share that. And whereas before the United States would procure that therapeutic cocktail for its own population, if there was a bioterrorist event in another part of the world, they would just call the United States government and says, "Can I please have some of that drug to treat my population?" I don't know if that is going to keep happening, or whether each country realizing that we're not sharing so well in the sandbox will want to have their own allocation of therapeutics so that they'll be able to take care of their citizens in case of an emergency. So those are the kind of things we have to think about in preparation for the next round.
Yeah, I think it's a great example in the healthcare space. I think you sort of broadening the question to supply chains in general. After the 2008 crisis, a lot of financial risk managers lost their jobs, and those that didn't lose their jobs started rethinking about how they thought about risk. And I think we're going to start seeing the same thing in the physical world of people that manage supply chain risk, that concentrate everything in one region or with a couple suppliers or didn't maintain supplies. So a lot of them will lose their jobs, and a lot will be thinking about risk differently. And I think this is going to talking about how we get to physical goods as opposed to just intellectual property that you asked in the question. We have started to see in the last couple of years about focusing on more local manufacturing. The value of labor arbitrage, of finding cheap markets to build your stuff, is declining in value, and increasing in value is time to market and suitability for customers. So we're starting to see a lot more micro manufacturing in local areas. Utility distributions. We have in the west coast of the U.S., we've seen a lot of risk in concentrating into one power provider. So we're looking at more grids. So I think we'll start seeing a lot more resiliency and redundancy built into a lot of systems with local assets. So that comes back to, do you trust your trading partners to ship you the high value goods in a pandemic? We're seeing that people don't play nicely now. That's part of it, but also we're a more connected world. So a isolated event in one part of the world was less likely to spill over. We're seeing more likely of that spilling over in the medical world. We've seen that in the financial world over the past couple decades. And we're now starting to see that in the supply chains of people that concentrated just-in-time inventory pipelines in regions of the world. There was an article a couple of weeks ago on Apple and its efforts to diversify its supply chain into India, and it just turned out to be too expensive. I don't recall the numbers, but I'll just pull out of my ass that would have been 10x cheaper than what they have lost in revenue over the past 3 months by not getting revenue, getting product out of China. Which is totally made up number, don't know it.
Yeah,
but
just adding to that. Yeah, and if we agree, and adding to that, Scott, I think now the world is divided in two. It's basic needs, like must-haves, and nice to have. For the companies that are really focusing on innovation, all your customers probably are telling you that they are focusing on basic stuff, and we've been hearing that with retailers and brands that are really trying to fulfill the basic needs, obviously. So companies around doing innovation, they are unfortunately, freezing in those opportunities, right? And what that means is that in the same way we treat software development and redundancy, for example, in databases, we think about the worst case scenario where a database will be destroyed or a data center will be destroyed because of an earthquake, right? What I think happened here is that companies didn't really have a true contingency plan in terms of worst case scenario. They never had this scenario in mind, which in software development we do have, right? So right now we are seeing the reaction to it. That means that companies are trying to see how they can actually fix it. You see Apple trying to get into India, and that's because they never had that plan. I don't think the world is going to change a lot from a supply chain perspective. I think we're still going to try to source from the same type of sources that we were before, because things were working pretty nicely. I think the only thing that will change is truly having a contingency plan that addresses the worst case scenario, which is this one is.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much.
You
We
can't,
about
but the
time.
real world.
Yeah, thanks so much. We about time on the discussion. I would love to go more on that. We'll have a couple more speakers lined up. I think it was a great discussion. I personally learned a lot, and I hope our listeners learn a lot as well. So thank you so much for your time, and please stick around to watch the rest of our summit. Some of the great things are coming. So Jeffrey, Scott, and Jonathan, thank you so much for again spending this afternoon with us, and hope you're having a great the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all, and
Thank
stay
you.
safe and healthy.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank
Be
you.
well.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rick Sommer, who's Executive Director at Stanford Pre-Collegiate Studies. He has more than 20 years of experience in admissions, STEM, curriculum, residential education, diversity and inclusion, international and multicultural education, and administration of programs for minors. Strong academic credentials with a PhD in mathematics from University of California, Berkeley, and over 30 years of experience teaching mathematics and logic. So Rick is going to talk about what we probably faced, a lot of us, either who are the parents or the ones who are studying right now, is that what does it actually change in our world that now we have gone virtual, now as we have doing a lot of education virtually, what it will be for us in the future for all of us, those who study and those who have children.
Hello, I'm Rick Sommer. I'm with Stanford Pre-Collegiate Studies, which is an organization at Stanford University that offers courses both in person and online to high school and younger students from around the world. We have a range of residential summer programs that will not take place this year, and we also have the Stanford Online High School under our umbrella. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about online learning that we've done within pre-collegiate studies and more generally at Stanford over the years, starting with some history and then talking about more recently, and in particular what we're doing to address the challenges of COVID-19. So just a long history of online learning at Stanford. We actually date back to the early 1960s, not me personally, but others that I've actually worked with. I was working with Patrick Suppies, who was a pioneer in computer-based education. He received a $1 million grant in 1963 to develop technology for teaching mathematics to elementary school students in Palo Alto. And from that project, that led into other activities at Stanford, offering courses online to undergraduates and also providing resources for students worldwide through distance learning and providing this opportunity to advance their education through using this technology. The key ideas of what Patrick Suppies developed was to use the computer as an intelligent tutor, to you have sophisticated ways of collecting student input as they work through, say, mathematical problems or other kinds of educational work, and then to not only give them feedback, but also guide them through the curriculum. This adaptive learning model was an efficient way for students to progress, working really well, not only for ones who wanted to get ahead in what they were doing, but also for students who needed to catch up. And this was used widely across the US. in the 1980s. Then in 1990s, Stanford developed the education program for gifted youth, which I became a part of in the mid-90s, which served to provide educational opportunities to talented students in mathematics and other subjects using these key features of individualized instruction and adaptive learning through primarily asynchronous content. Stanford also had projects in the School of Engineering. SITN was the Stanford Instructional Television Network that delivered content to Silicon Valley industry, and then it started in the 1950s, but later turned into the Stanford Center for Professional Development, which offers currently professional development opportunities in engineering and other subject areas. At Stanford Pre-Collegiate Studies, we opened the Stanford Online High School in 2006. This is a fully accredited degree granting school that I'll tell you a little bit more about in a few minutes. But I'll note in particular that this is a model of instruction that is based on synchronous engaged learning, and different from what a lot of online technology does today, online education does today. And in particular, different than the MOOCs, which took off in 2012 as they were companies were spun out of Stanford, including Udacity with Sebastian Thrun and Coursera with Andrew Ng and Daphne Koller. So coming around to the online high school, as I noted earlier, it's a fully accredited degree granting high school. It's accredited by both the Western Association of Colleges, Schools and Colleges, but also California Association of Independent Schools. The students are selected to be intellectually curious and passionate about learning. And the format is centered on a synchronous learning environment where students are in small class size and learning seminar style with their instructors, and an opportunity to learn from each other as well as from their teachers. And this model has been very effective in helping to develop community at the school, and not only in the students' intellectual development, but also their social and emotional learning as well. This model has become very popular as a lot of schools now are adapting to online learning as a result of a pivot necessitated by the impact of COVID-19. And the online high school is providing resources for those who want to learn more about this model through their website. So if you go to ohs.stanford.edu/how, you can get some instructional videos or sign up for a webinar that that gives some of the information that would be useful for those who want to create an engaging classroom and do more than just delivering content. I'll point out that it's been a very sudden transition for many educators, including the faculty at Stanford, who were forced to move to online learning very suddenly when it was necessary for students to leave campus just a few weeks ago. And what they're finding is that engaging with students is the real challenge. And so this is a model that helps see how we can engage with our students in the classroom, and how we can build the opportunities to develop community and to create a stronger learning experience in this kind of a setting. And I'll point out that this is a shift in the way of thinking from what we were doing in the earlier days of online learning, and it's one that we found to be very valuable. It has a high retention rate for keeping students around, keeping them engaged, and also has been a very positive impact on their overall educational experience. Nonetheless, I continue to think about ways to apply technology that is innovative and helps to create stronger experiences for students, including applying artificial intelligence in a model of individualized instruction and personalized learning, and thinking about how do we map our content, how do we deliver effectively the material and optimize the learning experience. So the use of technology has changed a lot over the years, and we continue to seek ways to be innovative in that process. And in this particularly difficult time, this has become very important for us to understand and find ways to effectively succeed with. So that's my short overview. I hope that was of value to you. I look forward to opportunities to hear questions or engage in conversations and learn about what others are doing in this space. And I appreciate your attention and thank you for your time. And I hope, I wish everybody good health and the best in these.
Hello, Rick. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Good to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Rick, thanks so much for giving this overview. And I guess a lot of us are facing this issue when we're not only virtual with our work, but we're also virtual with our learning. We're virtual with our kids also, right? That our whole families went virtual, and then we became more physical inside of our families. And what you have described is, I would think that would position you uniquely to kind of weather this turbulent times, as we all say, in the better shape. But is it true? Is it actually decrease the amount of craziness that is happening in your business and in your environment, or it's actually increased because you were the ones who were doing it before?
That's a good question. We certainly have gotten a lot of attention. There's a lot of interest in what our instructional model is, what our school environment is like, and how we provide a learning experience for our students. And so this has put demands on the school itself to be a resource. And as I said in the presentation, we are proactively providing that resource. In terms of demand on levels of interest and participation in the school, we've definitely seen that. There are a number of people, as you point out, who are suddenly finding themselves in an online learning setting unexpectedly, both on the student side, the learning side, and also on the instructional side. And it's, in many cases, not working very well. So people do turn to us for ideas and for best practices, kind of leveraging our experience. So we're definitely in a whirlwind when it comes to being a resource for these things.
Yeah. So when you said about the engagement student remotely, we also facing another situation where we need to engage the students remotely, but also engage our workforce remotely, engage our partners from both the business and the personal perspective. So what is your experience kind of can give us as a best practice of engaging this remote audience, be it a personal audience or professional audience, or maybe our remote clients? What are some best practices there?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm certainly seeing it myself in my work. Although I've had the experience in teaching online, just having my work be completely online is relatively new. And I would say that it's going to be different in teaching settings and vary also according to expectations in learning environments to begin with. For example, let's say with younger students, their expectations about engaging in a classroom are different than older ones, like high school students or college students tend to have less engagement than, say, elementary school or middle school students. And then we think about in our workplace, how are we engaging there? Just even adjusting to technology. I was just having conversations today with people about how different it is with meetings, especially large ones, and just the practices of interaction, how we do that. One of the basic principles in online high school educational model is the flipped classroom. Don't spend time in a synchronous environment doing things that could be done asynchronously. Record the lectures and distribute them so people can watch them at their own pace in their own time, and use the classroom time for engagement. I would say that would apply in a professional setting as well. There's probably a lot of time people are just presenting and communicating things that could have been recorded and viewed separately or provided through other media, rather than using that meeting time and having it be that the preliminary work that leads up to the discussion is handled separately. I think that that's going to help with the fatigue that we're all experiencing and spending a lot of time in meetings. I myself, and I know probably much of the audience, are spending a good part of their days on Zoom or in some other platform in meetings where this could be done more efficiently with kind of offline prep leading up. So that would be one idea on that. And then I also just think getting accustomed to the tools takes some time, finding out what works and what doesn't. In terms of engaging in a meeting itself, having different kinds of interaction, figuring out ways, the visual cues that we have in an in-person setting go away for the most part in the online setting. And so we have to find other ways to connect with people. I just mentioned, and everybody is probably learning how to get handy at this, but when you're using online platforms, you often are taking advantage of the text chat to have side conversations. And that's actually a rich way of communicating. And you can leverage that further by recognizing that and noting that those side channels can be very valuable and having those parallel conversations. Certainly we use that in the online high school. This gives teachers opportunities they don't have in the classroom. So for example, students can ask questions privately to the teacher that they would be embarrassed to ask in front of a class. And through that, the teacher can make adjustments and provide information and provide clarity in ways. And this could also happen in meetings as well.
Awesome. But one of the things one of our audience is actually asking is that a time ago, I spoke with some people from Stanford, and they highlighted the on-campus experience, meeting new people, and networking as some of the best things you can get from Stanford. So how do you actually get this networking? How do you actually get this connection, this ties that you have to the community and to your colleagues when you're being in the virtual world or in the virtual learning environment?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And no doubt we're suffering a loss by not having those in-person times. In-person times are no doubt valuable. They facilitate a kinds of interactions that support developing community and creating, strengthening the ties and connections between people. What just looking at the experience with the online high school, everybody involved in it, including myself, who was there from the beginning, was surprised at how strong the community is and how much we're able to achieve in the way of developing community. And this comes from multiple angles. Part of it is how do we use the classroom time, but it's also how do we use time outside of the classroom to engage. And then it's reinforced with in-person opportunities as well. So I'll have to admit that part of the online high school experience is having meetups with students who are local to you, having times to be on the Stanford campus together. We have a residential summer program. It's not happening this year, but in a normal year, the students are on campus for 2 weeks. That reinforces those connections that they make. And so there's a question, I think to answer the question very directly, I would say there is a deficiency in not being able to be in person on campus. And I don't see us ever being able to replace the power of that on-campus experience. And if we think about, undergraduate, graduate experience, there's so much to being there together. And, the fact that Stanford is so selective, limited number of undergraduates and grad students get to participate in that experience, Stanford doesn't have interest in scaling that because it would detract from that experience. That experience is built around the size of the class that is involved in that. And as soon as we're able to, we're gonna come back to that. Of course, it's going to be different. We're going to have different views. And just as a further example of the loss there, when the undergraduates were told that they needed to go home at the end of the winter quarter, which was just a few weeks ago, and then they were later told that they couldn't come back this academic year, there was certainly a lot of disappointment, and enough so that they are like asking for a refund. They want their money back, right? This is not what they paid for. This is not what they wanted. And the university's position on this is that the academic experience is still being provided for, but the students are saying, well, it's not just the academic experience that we find valuable. You have taken something away. And we haven't figured out how to bring that back in the same way.
No, it definitely, I think a challenge that a lot of businesses facing right now is that yes, you can supplement something online, but some things offline are not possible. But then on the other side, obviously, we sooner or later we're gonna get out of this crisis. And do you think some of those best practices? Do you think some of those things that we're practicing right now, as you said, maybe synchronous things, as you said, will be will be transformed into a different learning experience, a different offline learning experience by applying some of those online practices to the offline experiences?
Well, I definitely think so. And I would say that prior to the crisis that we're facing that forces us to innovate and think about things in new ways, we had already recognized that there's the experience of online learning at Stanford Online High School uh, gives ideas to improve best practices in a traditional classroom. But the flipped classroom model has an engaged learning model has been a practice in uh, bricks and mortar schools and live instruction as well. In the online setting, you think about that more and kind of in a bigger way, but certainly it applies in those settings as well. So I think people are going to be more aware of how valuable the in-person interactions are. They're going to want to leverage those. And so rather than just, if you think about the classroom setting, then having the kind of traditional model of a lecturer standing in front of a class and everybody sitting still and just listening, I'm thinking about how that is not a good use of in-person time. And a better use of in-person time is discussion and engagement and collaboration. And again, this has already been part of a theme in education recently, but I think it'll be a stronger theme. People are going to see that, well, the lecture experience could still even be online and in a hybrid model where the asynchronous learning is still delivered through recorded lectures. Let's use the class time to be as engaging, as discussion based as we possibly can. And I think that's going to be a lesson reinforced by the current experience.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks so much. So another question that I think is especially applicable to the parents, but I think to everyone also, that we finally found ourselves in the position where we kind of have to be the educators, right? We either have to be educators for ourselves, we have to rely more on ourselves to provide educational experience to both ourselves and for those of us who have children, to our children. So what do you think is some of the key personal lessons that we can take, how we can transform ourselves to be better educators to ourselves and better educators to our children or the people around us, especially for those leaders in the business community, how we can be better in educating and sharing this knowledge that we have right now?
That's a great question. And my children are grown up, they're adults, and one of them came back to live with us during this period. But I'm not in a position of providing education directly. But I think that parents can do such a wonderful job of supplementing the education provided by the schools. And in the current situation, they're forced into that role. But it's in this period of crisis and disarray and chaos, and it's probably they're mostly thinking about, while at the same time you're trying to figure out how to get your work done, you're mostly thinking about how do you keep your children occupied. And as I look around and with friends who have younger children, coworkers, or walk around my neighborhood and see how families are handling this, it's like all of their energy is just in thinking about keeping them occupied rather than thinking of this as an opportunity to actually improve on their education. Every parent has something to offer to help educate their children. It doesn't have to be in all of the traditional subject areas. It could be from life experiences. It could be from their expert knowledge in whatever it is in their professions. And I think taking this as a time and an opportunity to share that realistically, given the crisis situation, we're often preoccupied, and I think our minds are elsewhere. But I think that this concept gives hope that there would be a positive outcome of connecting and providing an educational experience for our children.
Yeah, definitely. And then the other question becomes, right, is that on the other side of this is that a lot of knowledge becomes commoditized. It becomes a commodity. You can click away and you can find something immediately, right? So what do you think is the upside of this abundance of information and what is the downside of this abundance of information, and how we can protect ourselves and our companies from kind of using the best sources for the decisions and best sources for educating ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to just comment on my kind of general philosophy of education. And if we look historically as what was important in education, uh, pre-information age, it was all about gaining knowledge and to some extent about gaining skills. In school, students were taught to memorize things, and then they were taught how to apply routine algorithms, for example, to solve problems or to apply rules to write essays. And as information becomes more accessible, those become less meaningful. I would also say that they were never the important thing about education. There's a famous quote attributed to Einstein saying that what an education really is everything that's left after you've forgotten what you've learned in school. In other words, it's not the facts that you learn that are important. Education is not just developing skills, but being able to approach the world in a meaningful way, to have confidence and to be able to think critically, to solve problems, to reason logically. And you don't learn all of those things by memorizing facts. So what the current situation allows is for us to free ourselves from having to worry about being a storehouse for information, and to focus on developing the skills and developing these these kind of soft skills that enable us to actually move forward. Being able to collaborate and to work together, being able to, again, have confidence and apply leadership. And what school can be doing and life can be doing outside of school is providing students with experience doing that. And so, I see a school environment, one of the best things it can be doing. First of all, how do we inspire our children? How do we motivate them? And how do we get them engaged in learning in meaningful ways? And routine memorization isn't that. But how do you get them excited about the information's out there? And once you motivate them, once you inspire them, then these other things take care of themselves. They're going to learn how to access information, and they're going to learn how to move to that next step. What schools do now, unfortunately too often, is they actually they stifle inspiration and creativity and curiosity. And to me, the greatest thing a student can take away are those things: inspiration and curiosity.
Awesome.
So we're free to do that now. Let's do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a great note on which we can stop. And Rick, thank you so much. It has been very informative, and again gave a lot of hope and a lot of structure to my thinking and thinking of our audience. So thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us. I hope you stay for a little bit longer to look for some of our other speakers. And again, thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and I wish everybody well and good health and the best in these very challenging and difficult times.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rick.
All right. Goodbye.
next speaker is Jean-Marc Frangois. He's a Senior Vice President of External Innovation in British Telecom. He's a global executive specialized in maximizing innovation in large corporations. He has worked and lived both in Europe and Silicon Valley and leads truly global R&D team on 3 continents. His practices is extensively documented by INSEAD and the Harvard Business School. And he has a significant experience with mobile, including 5G, cloud, digital, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and augmented reality. So without further ado, I'm giving away to Jean-Marc Frangois, and he will talk about the innovation hostile environments that we're all facing right now.
Pleased to be with you for the next 20-25 minutes. This is Jean-Marc Frangois, and we're now inside the series of very diverse videos, which I'm sure you've already become familiar with as part of SVIC. Now, in the next 20-25 minutes, we're going to talk about innovation in hostile environments. So what does that mean? And as a way of introducing the subject, I've used this famous Hokusai painting, The Wave. And when you first look at it, you see mostly that threatening wave. And if you pay attention, you see Mount Fuji in the distance. If you pay even more attention, you see that there's 2 poor fishermen boats there, and the fishermen are quite pale, and they're hanging on for dear life in there. And that's kind of representative of the situation we're in today, unfortunately, with this major sanitary crisis we've got going on. So the key question is, how do you keep your head up? How do you manage to continue innovating in circumstances like that? And there's 3 things I'd like to discuss with you. I mean, the first one really is lessons that I've learned, and it was during the first bubble burst, so the 2001 major nuclear winter that we had at the time, which was more pronounced here in Silicon Valley than the 2008 crisis, which were more financial and more centered on New York and the financial centers. I arrived here actually in Silicon Valley in 2000, having already had quite a career in Europe. And the company that sent me here, BT, British Telecom, sent me here to set up a corporate venture fund of $250 million. And during that time in 2000, 2001, 2002, I mingled with a lot of entrepreneurs and startups and venture capitalists. I still do today. And I wanted to share with you some of the lessons of, what did people do well that allowed them to survive during those very difficult times, which are already 20 years ago. A lot of these lessons still apply, and they're actually very applicable outside of the startup environment, inside a corporate environment. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. The second point I'd like to discuss with you is what I call a massive injection of steroids that we're all getting in our digital practices at the moment. And I'm not talking just about Zoom and doing the sort of thing that we're doing right now, which would have been practically inconceivable only 2 months ago, and now is becoming the new normal. We're going to go a little bit under the surface. I'm going to tell you a bit more from my experience of working for a company that was a massive purveyor of digital services, a telecommunications company. There are things, undercurrents that are happening at the moment in what's happening, which I'd like to share with you. And finally, I'd like to talk about corporate war zone. And what I mean by that is that even in the best of times, innovation is really, really difficult. I mean, there's many reasons for that, but honestly, if it was easy to come up with the next big billion-dollar idea of growth, everybody would be doing it, everybody would be rich. So it's super hard to do it anyway. And even when you have that brilliant idea or new business model, you know that in large corporations, there's a lot of people that don't like change. And I'm not talking specifically about BT here. I think it's a problem everywhere. It's human nature. Don't move my cheese. So you learn over time to deal with this when you are in charge of innovation and when you're specifically measured to come up and with innovations, ideas, and also to make sure that they cross the finish line. So that's what we're going to talk about in the third and final section. Let's get into it. So let's get started. The lessons from 2001 startups. First, I'd like to say I arrived in the US and in Silicon Valley in 2000. As you can see on the chart here, the internet bubble, the .com bubble, burst in March of 2000, in fact, beginning of April of 2000. So I arrived in the US right after this in a very dramatic context. And my role at the time was that of a corporate venture capitalist. And this was a much, much deeper crisis than 2008, if we're honest. 2008 and the financial crisis was more of an East Coast phenomenon. It was felt in Silicon Valley, but not quite as deeply as the dot-com burst, of course. So let's have a look at this, because during that time I was a corporate venture capitalist, so I had a lot of interactions with startups, entrepreneurs, and VCs in this context, which is somewhat similar to the one we're seeing today. And there were many lessons that still are absolutely relevant today. So let's start with the first thing. The first thing is replanning. And that was a very clear demarcation line for me between those startups that were just trying to survive and adjust their existing plan to the new circumstances versus the other ones who were completely zero-based rebudgeting and saying, right, nothing we know is true anymore. And we have to build an entirely new plan, whether it's a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month, 5-year plan. They replan from scratch. That was actually very important, because one thing that is true in these crisis contexts is that nothing is like it was before, and there's no point trying to make small adjustments. The context is very complicated. You can renegotiate it with customers. You can try and trade some longer-term commitments for immediate discounts. You can renegotiate with suppliers. And you also need to rethink what your portfolio is about and what needs to continue in the portfolio, what needs to be rethought. And this is where innovation plays a big role, of course. You need to put your thinking cap on to sometimes pivot or sometimes take advantage of a scene that will be very different. Like in a minute, we're going to talk about how digital will be much more important. So that is certainly something to take into account. So, these are the major changes that need to happen, and there was a real clear difference between those who did this and those who didn't. The second point was the over communication. So I like to say that in times of crisis, it's like on the Scrabble board, words count triple. You really have to over communicate, and normally if you have a team meeting with your management team every week or every month, that needs to become a lot more rapid. I mean, you probably need to have a daily stand-up. Why? Because things change daily. I mean, things change so fast in a time of crisis that you need to get new data to make the right decisions. And of course, you need to over-communicate about that. That transparency that you put in place during these times of crisis earns you a lot of credibility, again, with investors, with suppliers, with customers, and also with your employees. So not to hesitate to over-communicate. The third bit is staying calm, which is easier said than done in the current circumstances. In the dot-com bubble, this thing crashed by more than 90% from the top to the bottom of the stock market, and people thought there was no tomorrow, really. But it's really important to show leadership in those circumstances, particularly to your employees and to your teams. One person on board needs to be at the helm and have a steady hand on the rudder. And you need to be that person, and you need to make sure that, yes, you get data, yes, you make decision, yes, you do all that fast, but fast doesn't mean panic. And being able to demonstrate and display a calm and level-headed attitude during these circumstances is really important for leadership and management. The last one is being respectful. Again, this was something that I witnessed during the crisis in 2001. Many companies actually panicked so much that they let go a large contingent of their employees and talent in virtually no time. And, in my opinion, you need to think about how you can do that and whether you really need to do that and explore all other possibilities before you do that, because losing talent is really important, and it's a difficult thing to recover from. You need to identify your crisis team first, the people that are going to be around you and help you on a daily basis. And this is probably a fairly close set of people. And then before you decide to let go non-essential people, you really need to explore everything about additional lines of funding, anything about renegotiation, as I said before, anything that can be done that saves costs. One of the things that was done that was not uncommon at the time was the management team, the top management team, decided to either forego salary entirely or get salary cuts, which would then be compensated by equity catch-up. Right, so my second point here is about this new digital wave that is forced upon us by the circumstances we're in. And I think you've heard many things about it already. I'll start by saying this feels to me like a bit of a Zoom fest. Actually, even today, we're kind of using a Zoom-like type of interaction. Of course, it's going to be complemented with live Q&A. But I must say that if most of us today in large corporations are kind of used to these types of interactions, especially if you have large teams based in multiple geographies, it's not the case for everyone. I was listening to a very, very interesting speech, by the way, on Zoom by one of the largest, the investment manager, one of the largest banks in France. And these guys are used to just going to the office religiously every day. A lot of that going on in Japan as well. Very difficult to get a Japanese salaryman to not go to the office. But with the phase we're in, they're kind of discovering that it's possible. This guy concluded, the French guy concluded his speech by saying, I have learned one big thing over the last 2 weeks. It's I can work from home. I couldn't believe my ears when he said that. He actually said that. Of course, I thought, everybody knew that, but not everybody does. I mean, you have to think of not necessarily us as the total market. We're kind of not necessarily representative of the biggest market out there. A lot of people are discovering new things. A lot of people are discovering, for instance, that they can do a lot more with e-commerce. They're becoming more agile, picking the best products, especially when they're out of stock on Amazon. They discover new sites. They become really good at it. They become good at picking the right mobile app that gives them the most flexibility. They also become good at sorting the good from the not so good out of social networks. The climate we're in is just brings a lot of anxiety and it can be toxic. So people are learning how to filter for themselves. I hope they are. I think they are. They're learning to distinguish what's really useful, what's not that useful, and how to filter the good and the bad things. But also, robotics. I mean, we've been talking about robotics for a long time, but in enterprises, physical robotics, and particularly in warehouses and in factories, these are making a big, not a comeback because they've always been here, but accelerating the plans for more robotics if you know that it's going to be difficult in some circumstances to rely purely on human workforce. And finally, something called RPA, which is robotic process automation. For those of us who know that IT in the last 20, 30 years has been mostly automating paper-based processes. Well, there's still junction points between IT process A and IT process B, where there needs to be a guy somewhere in the middle or a human somewhere in the middle checking that the output of process A is good enough to be put in process B. And RPA is all about making this seamless and automating it. And it's working. It was largely in banks and insurance companies in the last 2 or 3 years, but it's making a big inroads into the rest of the industries. The second point I wanted to talk about is what I could call that boredom. Not actually, it's not collab boredom at the moment. I mean, we've all been on these marathon calls, I kid you not, of 3 or 4 hours, whether it's a sales or a planning call or whether it's a product design call, lasts forever, and how boring it can be, and also how difficult it can be to keep your attention up. Simply because people speak with different accents, different languages, different, some of them, and so including myself, English is not my mother language, so it's kind of more difficult for me to remain attentive in those marathon calls. But one thing I've learned, and one of the innovations that we brought into the space, my former employee BT, is that we had, for instance, a partnership with Dolby. And Dolby, if you listen to one of these long conference calls with Dolby sound and very good quality image, I swear it makes a massive difference in your ability to remain focused on what's being discussed. So that's one of the learnings that we're getting out of this, of course. You also learn as a person to become a bit of a better communicator, to be in kind of publishing mode. I mean, think of how you put your ideas across, and not simply as a face-to-face meeting, but as, using some tools like we're using today, and maybe I'm jinxing myself here, and I'm not being such a good communicator, but it's very difficult to do that naturally unless you have some practice. So this is something that is sinking into the psyches of more and more people, into our collective DNA, I would say. Now, having said that, the tools we're using today are still very much 1.0. For instance, when I speak on occasions like that, and we have a live audience, I would absolutely like to have a few things that I don't have today. What I have today is I can see chats on the side when I'm speaking, and I can see questions and Q&A. I can even group people in subgroups to have conversations about specific topics of what's being addressed. But it's still lacking a few things, like, for instance, some level of AI that's looking at what is being discussed, and also getting some feedback from the audience. The biggest problem when you do something like this, it becomes very one way. As a speaker, you don't really sense whether the audience is engaged or not, whether they're just doing emails on the side or doing something else where you're speaking. Again, probably jinxing myself here. But it would be really nice if we could have some AI tools that allow you as a speaker to sense the level of engagement on a specific sub point and see if you want to spend more time on it or less time on it, or just skip something ahead, or basically have a sort of dynamic way of changing the shape of what you're talking about depending on what the audience thinks. This is something you can do. You can read the audience when you're presenting face to face. It's very hard to do that with the tools we have today. Same with summarizing. Summarizing technology has existed for a long time, but it's not kind of automatic and rolled out in the tools we use today. I would love to have that 3-hour conference call summarized in a matter of a few paragraphs, and I would also love to be able to search it and say, okay, let's go straight to the point where that decision was made, and replay the 30 seconds before, and who made, how did we come to that decision, and who made it. So these are good tools that we haven't got yet. I mean, it's still very 1.0. Now, the last point I'll make about this new digital life or undercurrent here is not thanks God it's Friday, but thanks God 5G is coming. A dirty little secret, guys, here. None of the telecommunication service providers are so keen on 5G in spite of what they all say publicly, simply because it's a massive investment, and who needs a new capital outlay and investment at this time? And we didn't need it last year, we need it even less today, especially because 4G, the 4th generation mobile, is already pretty good. You can have pretty good quality video on your smartphone. So 5G is not that straightforward, but with the new usage that we're going through at the moment and the volume of it and how people are getting used to it more and more, 5G is actually going to be a massive relief in terms of offering a next generation tool set that will have much bigger speed and much more ample bandwidth to utilize in those circumstances. But it's not just about speed and bandwidth. Another little secret here is that 5G also has this super fast response time that 4G didn't have. And for instance, what happened in Wuhan, few people know that, but when it started in Wuhan, the Chinese were very fast to react. And one of the things that they did very well was that they sent autonomous delivery vehicles to replenish the stocks of some of the hospitals and with medical equipment. And they used these delivery vehicles, but of course they couldn't really rely 100% on them quite yet, even though there was virtually no traffic in the city of Wuhan. So they had remote drivers that could be sitting, in Beijing or in Shanghai or in Shenzhen, for all we know, with a wheel, a bit like players on a video games, a wheel and pedals, and they would take over the driving of the vehicle when there was an obstacle or something. Now that obstacle, and it's the same for drones, by the way, they also sent drones for hard to reach places. But if you don't have super fast response time, those drones, you're in the tree before you see it at the other end. So you need to have this super fast response time. And that's the sort of thing that 5G is going to bring to us. So a lot of goodness coming out of the challenges that we are getting together here. All right, so to finish with quickly, a few lessons from what I call corporate war zone, which is all about making innovation happen in large organizations, which by nature are prudent, not necessarily all risk averse, but they have built-in mechanisms to protect themselves, and that's quite a good thing. But in terms of crisis, you really need to have a few tricks up your sleeves to make things happen faster. And as I was in charge of innovation for a number of years at BT, I've kind of developed these tricks. So let me share those with you. First is using fear rather than greed. I've tried both sides with my management, product divisions, and everything else, and I can attest that fear works better than greed. It's especially true in Silicon Valley, where there are teams that are there specifically to invent the next disruption and look at your business model and think, how am I going to disrupt it? And there are so many examples already. I'm not going to go through that list. You've heard it ad nauseum, I'm sure. So working on am I going to be disrupted? What can I do to prevent that, to mitigate that risk? Should I be on the front foot? That is normally using fear in a positive way. I would argue this is one of the things that needs to be considered. The second one is negotiating for speed. As I said, there are processes which are in place in large corporates to protect the company and its shareholders from reputational risk or all sorts of other risks which are normally held in big registers. One of those, as an example at BT, is cyber risk and cyber attacks and cyber security risks. So quite naturally, and in a very well-designed process, is a cyber assessment lab which forces every new project in the company to go through a very thorough assessment of whether it's safe or not. And that was actually slowing my innovation process down, because for innovation you need to have a portfolio of things that you experiment with really quickly to say, okay, I'll go for this one and not that one. So basically I negotiated in order to install a light version of this process, but instead of lending my projects into the real production side of the IT estate or the real network, my projects landed in a secure copy environment of those which had nothing to do, which wouldn't compromise any of the real resource of the company. And that allowed me to have the speed I needed for technical evaluations. Another thing that I use is more of a human touch. It's rookie's power, as I call it. So a lot of people get named to new roles in the company, promoted to new roles, and they're very good vectors for getting innovation to work inside their division, because they want to mark their new territory, and they want to be seen as being innovative and doing things that are new. I've had a lot more successes, and my team has actually always tried to identify those people. I've had more successes with new people in post than people that have been in post over a long term. They have typically shown more appetite for innovation. And the last point I'll make is this sort of controversial point about, let's not just look at Silicon Valley. Let's also look at what else is also going on in Asia. Of course, for corporates wanting to improve their innovation processes, Silicon Valley is a must stop, right? You need to come, stop, look, learn what's going on with Silicon Valley, with not just lean and design thinking and some of the good processes that you've heard about, but a lot of things that are happening in Silicon Valley. But that's not the only stop. I would say you also need to look at what's going on in Asia. I've done that in the last 10 years, and I've seen that the practices and the processes of innovation there are somewhat different from those in California. And they're very complementary. And it's also due to the fact that there are some environmental differences. Well, one is the leapfrogging of mobile, because in many regions in Asia, people went straight into smartphone use for online, for everything online, as opposed to laptop and PCs. Mobile payment ubiquity is there, absolutely. Some of these super apps, the WeChat apps, the WeChat app and others are really interesting, because they're not just a social communications app, but they also embody every little piece of the e-commerce chain, from inventory management to selling to payment, etc., etc. Then there's the video centricity of e-commerce that's interesting also in the region. Then there's cities that are being built from the ground up with IoT and digital in mind, like the Woven City in Japan that Toyota has recently announced, but many others in China in the region. And finally 5G, of course, which was supposed to be launched in time for the Olympic Games in Japan. The operators there are launching at scale 5G networks. There will be earlier lessons to be learned in terms of use cases and usage. We talked about this a minute ago, but that will be a place to watch. So not just the environment, but also the practices, right? The speed that's going on there, the sort of what I call respectfully organized chaos, where you make a commitment and then you scramble to deliver, but in a way that actually nearly always work. There's a lot of practices to be learned. Not all of it's applicable to the Western world, but some of it definitely is, and it's worth looking into it. All right, well, look, thank you very much for your attention over the past 25 plus minutes. Apologies, we went a little over. In closing, I'll say, well, I haven't said what I'm doing now, because I've been working for BET for a long time, and I'm now doing three main things. Number one is I continue advising startups and mentoring startups and entrepreneurs. But I also advise corporates, large and medium-sized corporates, on their open innovation practice, particularly here in Silicon Valley, in partnership with SVIC. And thirdly, I also work with INSEAD, which is where you see my INSEAD email here. INSEAD is a business school in Europe, and we're working specifically with professors in Singapore and in France about this last point I made about the cut and paste Asia. How do we extract the lessons out of Asia that could be a good complement to what people learn here in Silicon Valley? With that, thank you again, and I'll be super pleased to interact with you in live Q&A in a moment, and thank you very much.
Hi, Mark. Jean-Marc, we're live. Hello. Thanks so much. Jean-Marc, thanks so much for your presentation. It was really interesting, given some of the insights to what has happened before and where we're kind of heading right now with both the telecom and the venture capital perspective. So the first question that we got was on the different types of innovation, because I think a lot of people, when they start thinking about innovation, they're thinking that there's the innovation. And for some of them, it could be a Silicon Valley type of innovation. For some of them, it might be a corporate innovation. Let's say the big banks, for which I used to work for a long time, they innovate differently than, let's say, a Silicon Valley company. And then you also quickly touched about the Asian innovation. And then I'm sure that there are other types of innovation throughout the world. They still kind of focus on the same thing, how you can bring new products, how you can bring new markets, but yet they are different. And given your experience as a global innovator, what do you think are some key differences and some key common parts between those different types of innovations in the different types of the world?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Laz, and thanks for the audience for asking that question. So clearly, there's one thing I'll say before I talk about the geographic differences and the differences by region. The first thing is we tend to think of innovation as invention, as the spark of genius somewhere in a lab where you come up with a brand new product that is very techno-centric, that has something unique in it. And God knows we need that at the moment for the vaccines and the treatments for COVID-19. But when you think about it, a lot of the innovation lately has been slightly more mundane than that. And most of the innovation today happens in business models. I mean, one typical example is platform plays, where you have customers on one side and suppliers on the other side, like the Amazon model or the eBay model. A lot of companies innovate by applying a platform model to their existing business. So it doesn't have to be just invention of pure technical genius. It can be things like that. There's also a lot of innovation in the way you deal with your customers. So it could be channel innovation. Digital is a good example, but it could be also post-sale in customer service. There's a lot going on in improving net promoter score, again, in using mobile in the relationship with customers, in using AR and VR in the relationship with customers. So these are all interesting types of innovations which are not all in the same bucket of the mad professor type innovation. Now, when we talk about geographies, I mean, there are significant differences in the way people look at innovation. And also, it really depends whether you're innovating in a small startup or innovating in a large company. And one of the mistakes that some corporate companies do when they arrive here in Silicon Valley is they look at startups and they say, oh my gosh, we need to do something like that. We need to behave like a startup. And of course, it's virtually impossible for a company of 100,000 people, like was the case in BT for me. Impossible for a company like that to behave like a startup of 20 people. You can take some of the ingredients that make them successful, but it's very difficult to operate at the same speed with the same agility. So you need to adjust your innovation to your context as well. Now, in large corporations, as I was trying to describe in the segment that we just heard, it's really about aligning planets, and it's really about not just having a good idea, but making sure that everybody in the company understands and lines up their own resource to do something to cross the finish line. And that is, it takes a lot of practice and organization in order to be able to do that. And it also takes a mindset of not taking no for an answer, of course. Now, what is really difficult is to move from the position where you have a person who stirs up innovation in a company, an innovator, to a position where everybody does that, for a living. And that's what we see in most digital native companies. If you look at Amazon, or if you look at Google, or if you look at Facebook, when they come to their quarterly meetings, meetings where they get their management meeting, people are normally asked, what is the idea they're bringing to the table? Every quarter, you need to think of something new. And when it gets ingrained in people's psyches, it changes a lot how people behave. So the geographies now are something of a different. So I've been paying a lot of attention. In fact, I'm at the moment, what I'm doing is I'm doing a piece of research for INSEAD on the differences between what happens in Silicon Valley, how people innovate in Silicon Valley, and what happens in Asia. And the digital native companies here and there are very different. And remember, in Asia, it's not just three BATs, as we call them. It's not just the Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. There's a whole ecosystem of 25 plus very large scale digital players. And they're doing things that are radically different. So I mentioned a few of these things in the segment we had. And first, they're riding on the wave of mobile payment, which is still something that is not as ubiquitous here as it is there. They're also riding on the fact that they have the super apps, the WeChats of this world. They are big fluidity ingredients for anything digital. There's a lot of, as I said, video centricity in e-commerce. People buy a lot more online because they've seen someone in their social network promote something, or someone who's a key opinion leader, as they call them, KOLs, sell something to them on video. So that's a slightly different mindset. I mean, there's the very famous China speed, and there's a lot of research at the moment for the Western world to try and understand how this China speed happens. And people know about this 996 thing, right? So yes, Chinese people work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And that, of course, helps with the speed altogether. It's not necessarily transposable in other geographies because you can't really change the work intensity of people in the same way, nor is it necessarily desirable to do it that way. But there's also this slightly different attitude to how to accept challenges. For many of us who have dealt with Chinese suppliers or Chinese customers, we know that when there's a challenge, very often the answer is yes, we can do it, even when you think it's virtually impossible to do it. And there's this kind of organized, scrambled chaos for delivering what was promised to the customer. And this actually happens not just in China, but in large parts of Asia. And this sort of organized Brownian movement, which people have looked at it before and said, yeah, but that's we can't do that. There's a lot to be learned in our large Western organization about how we can replicate some of that, not everything, but some of it. So, I mean, these are some of the differences that I see at the moment between the different innovation types between geographies. And we haven't talked about Europe, but Europe has also a role to play in innovation. And it's largely, I mean, innovation in Europe in the startup field is largely promoted by or supported by governments, more so than in the US, for instance. But Europe has a distinct flavor of innovation, which puts the human more in the center seat. Now, when all of this is over and the whole COVID debacle, settles and we get back to normal life, I think there's going to be a very interesting perspective to be taken on taking a part of what you see in Silicon Valley in design thinking, in agile methodology, taking a part of the speed of Asia and taking a part of the human respect of Europe, blend that into a new model for innovation. We'll see if that happens.
No, that's definitely something that's very interesting. So the last question that I have is that we all want to innovate, and I guess there is not a single company before, and not a single company right now that will say, okay, we don't need to innovate, we just fine as we are, right? But the question is that how do we actually learn about those things? As you watched the previous presenters about the UV robots, right? A lot of hospitals might not be even aware of that. So how do you actually attack this unknown world of innovation, and how do you actually keep yourself innovating while facing those uncertainties, either in the regular business or in the situations right now? So on the one side, we need to innovate. On the other side, we strain for resources, we strain for the revenue, we strain for the physical locations. How do we make sense of all of that?
Yeah, that's I'm getting a lot of these questions at the moment because that's what I call survival mode. In many circumstances at the moment, the short-term decisions are being made, and they're really about cost containment and cash preservation. And people tend to think they don't have time to think about innovating in those circumstances. But in reality, people are way more open to doing things now than they were only 2 months ago. I mean, if you take just examples at societal level, would you have guessed that a 2 trillion stimulus would be possible only 2 months ago? No, right? So that's kind of reflex innovation, but it is innovation in true form, because for the Fed and the government in the US to be able to take those decisions so quickly, you have to have a bit of an open mind, right? So that's an example, but there's many other examples of things that are happening. I mean, you look at people wearing masks. I mean, and there was it was painful to watch because I was very attentive at what was going on in Wuhan, in China, from January, because I was supposed to travel there actually in January. So I was really paying attention, and I've been traveling to Asia so much that I know that for Asian people, wearing a mask is very normal in circumstances like that. And in Europe and in the US, you could see that it was not, it was, people were not, and even governments were actually saying, no, no, you don't need to wear masks. And it was partly due to the fact that, of course, the governments hadn't planned and, dilapidated their stockpile of masks. So they were trying to tell the population, don't panic, you don't need a mask. But now, of course, it's getting to the point where everybody in my neighborhood here in California is beginning to wear masks. And again, that mindset change makes you think actually in the circumstances, there are bigger things that can happen than things that have ever happened before, because the mindset is more open to, well, survive, yes, but survive and look at the future with different eyes. So this, as I was saying in the video, this is the time that you can look at your portfolio with a bit of an X-ray machine and say, what do I want to kill in my portfolio? What is likely to survive? And what are the things that are now becoming even more important than they were before? Because we're much more digital centric, we're much more, we don't have the physical interactions anymore. How do you transform to do that? It's not possible to do that in every industry, of course, but some and a lot of the online businesses that we have here in California are actually doing reasonably well. Well, first, because they can have remote workers. They don't have to have people go to the office every day. And they're operating in dematerialized environment, many of them in software. Of course, these businesses are actually, some of them, striving. So it really depends. I mean, the question about how we do in such an environment, how we innovate in such an environment, I would say the main thing is keep an open mind and don't take anything for granted that was there before. Put your thinking cap on and reinvent what you're doing with your business. But don't do that in any panic where you have to get data to do that. And getting data today is not that easy. But with your team, you have to have a regular pace of data meetings to make decisions.
Awesome, Jean-Marc. Thank you so much for your time, and it was very informative and very insightful. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you keep watching our summit. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Our next speaker is Gerald Brady, who's the managing director of SVB Network at Silicon Valley Bank Financial Group. He spent his entire career in tech with companies ranging from Ziff Davis to Yahoo to 3i to Siemens and to Silicon Valley Bank. His experience ranges from sales to a decade as a venture capitalist at 3i and Siemens, where he invested in the UK, Germany, Israel, and Silicon Valley. He's currently leading SVB Network, a part of the corporate relationship team, which works with senior Fortune 500 executives. And in his talk, he's going to talk about shift in the impactful investing and how the global banking community and the banking community of the Silicon Valley addresses some of the changes that we're facing these days, and what are the changes that are coming right now, and what are some changes that are coming in the next several months and years.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Gerald Brady with Silicon Valley Bank, and I'm delighted to join you this afternoon. I'm going to spend about 20 minutes or so chatting a little bit about venture capital, and how we see it may be potentially impacted by the COVID-19 outbreak. To start, let me give you a quick introduction to myself. I grew up in the UK, moved to Silicon Valley 20 years ago, was a partner at a firm called 3i, a large international venture capital firm. So saw the boom and bust of the dot-com era, and then joined Siemens in 2003, and I ran the early stage venture group here in the States, and then ended up holding a number of positions at Siemens over the coming years, including running investor relations through the financial crisis in 08 and 09 in the States. I joined Silicon Valley Bank 10 years ago, and so over the last 10 years we've obviously seen a very different venture capital environment, which has been really on a tear for the last decade. And Silicon Valley Bank's got a great purview to this because we were founded 37 years ago and are today the largest bank in the world focused on what we call the innovation economy. And our mission is to focus and help increase the probability of client success. And our clients are really split into two categories. It's entrepreneurs and it's the venture capital investors. So some of the companies you might know that we work with are businesses like Zendesk, Ring, Andreessen Horowitz, Beyond Meat, Pinterest, and firms like Lightspeed on the venture capital side. SVB focuses on three core industry sectors: technology, energy and resource innovation, and the software and internet space, as well as life sciences and healthcare. So if you think about that, that encompasses a very broad range of companies in those sectors. You can imagine that the tech sector today is the origin of the bank. It's about 75% of our clients today. And then obviously healthcare and life sciences has been a long-standing part of Silicon Valley since the birth of Genentech over the many years. And then we also bank the funds, as I mentioned, and so today we're probably banking in excess of 1,1600 private equity and venture capital firms. And then an outlier that we also are the largest player in is the premium wine industry. And that, again, is a business we were fortunate to get involved with over many years ago now. But we focus on wine companies from Santa Barbara all the way up to Washington State and have grown very successfully there. And over the last 37 years, SVB has become the largest bank in the world, as I say, focused on this. So in the last quarter, we reported financial results. We have about $161 billion in deposits and investments, $33 billion in loans. So we're pretty large. We're now, I think, the 28th largest bank in the world. And we're laser focused on the entrepreneurs at the end of the day. And we do what you would expect commercial banks to do. So we manage deposits, we lend, we provide credit cards, treasury management, fund management, international banking. And then in the States, we've also built a private bank and wealth management business as well. And then more recently, just over a year ago, we acquired a bank in Boston called Leerink to add investment banking capabilities to SVB as well. And our clients are really at the forefront of innovation around the world, and it really is increasingly global. So we have 28 offices spanning the US. We opened in Toronto last year where we got our license. We most recently opened in Copenhagen, Denmark in November. And our European footprint includes London, Ireland and Germany now. And then we're in Israel, and we have offices in Hong Kong, Beijing, Shanghai and Shenzhen as well. So pretty international, cover many of the most important markets for the world. And our clients are global by nature. So we have companies that we work with, whether it's a Brazilian startup expanding into the States or a UK company expanding into China. So we very much have clients international from the outset. And what really makes us different is this 30-year plus experience of dealing with startups through good time and bad. We've seen this through many cycles. I personally have seen it as well, going through the dot-com boom and bust in my prior career. Was in the tech industry in the 90s as well, so I've got plenty of experience of seeing good times and bad there as well. And our perspective is that innovation is not going away. If you think about the industry, it's increasingly diverse, increasingly global, and technology innovation in particular touches literally every aspect of our society. So the investors themselves are continuing to evolve. It certainly spans angel investors, but private equity institutions as well. And if you think about the core of the industries that we serve today, we talk about a three-legged stool. It's the startup and entrepreneurs themselves, it's the investors, and then increasingly it's also the corporates who are investing in that universe. So if you think about firms like M12 from Microsoft, or GV, which is part of Google, or Salesforce, Intel, Qualcomm, and many other corporates who've been established and investing for many, many years. This is really the universe that we serve today. The other thing to bear in mind is that innovation is not going away. It is here to stay. It's always actually been around, and it may ebb and flow, but if you think about the power of innovation, I do not believe that we will see innovation decrease in importance nor pace through the coronavirus. And yes, it may be challenging times, but I think it's going to be clear that there will be opportunities out of this. And if there is a lesson from history, it is that in downturns we see many great companies being created. Sometimes, as you may have heard, necessity is the mother of innovation. And I think you'll see companies that are created solving problems we didn't know we had, and opportunities will be created through this. And I'll touch on that in a second. So we can already tell that we're seeing winners and losers from the downturn over the last 12 weeks. And remember, we're only 12 weeks into this. So today we can see that obvious categories like video conferencing, collaboration tools, security software, they're all continuing to grow dramatically. You'll obviously have heard of continuing hacks, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. This is spend that is really, I would say, secure, and most of our security clients are certainly continuing to see customers continue to invest in security software. An area, though, that I would say is having its moment is an area like telemedicine, which is not necessarily new, but suddenly the impetus to use telemedicine has never been greater. Similarly, I think it's true of online education. This is a category that's clearly having its moment. As you think of the vast majority of children, certainly in America and Europe, and many places around the world, in Korea, China, etc., where school has been online for weeks and increasingly months in many markets. I'm also living through the impact on college tours. This is spring break for my son, who would normally be visiting colleges in person. And so companies like ZeeMe, which provide the technology for colleges to do college tours, are clearly seeing a pickup. And so this is again one byproduct of the impact of COVID, companies picking up and doing very well in these areas. If you think about enterprise software, many aspects of enterprise software continue to do very well. And in fact, if you think about areas like cloud technology, AI, machine learning, again, all of these markets are going to continue to do very well, will be very robust. And it may be in some cases that flat is the new up, but that's going to be pretty impressive this year. For many of you in the States, food delivery is something that has become a necessity. It is impossible for many people to either get to a supermarket, or people want to support their local restaurants, but they don't want to necessarily pick up and they can't eat in the restaurants, and so food delivery continues to be strong. And then, as we've seen, and you again are probably very aware, the gaming, Netflix, Amazon Prime, consumption of content and media is clearly expanding as people try to find avenues to distract them through all of this. So again, we'll see things continue to grow in these areas. And then related to that are apps and technologies like Peloton, online yoga classes, online gym sessions. And again, I think the growth in Peloton and other health applications and devices is going to continue to be very strong in the coming weeks. And then have a look at what's inside your fridge. It's pretty clear that food is not a category that's been impacted by this at all. Everyone's been stocking up, and certainly there are reports in the UK that weekly sales have risen dramatically for the UK, for the food retailers in the UK. But not all categories have done well. So if we look at categories like physical anything, so you can imagine there are no meetings anymore. The conference industry's had a hit. Travel has stopped. Sport has stopped. Going to the movies has stopped. Hotels has stopped as people no longer travel. Restaurant apps like OpenTable are clearly seeing a massive impact on their business. And then if you think about areas like non-food retail, so again, most retailers have been shut outside of the supermarkets, but that's clearly a challenge. And then in terms of discretionary spending, most consumers today, and we're a good example, they're spending their money on food and the essentials. You can't really spend it anywhere else at this point. And then I would say if you're providing technology for some of these impacted verticals, so if you think about travel, tourism, conferences, etc., you're clearly going to be impacted just because the end markets that you're serving are impacted as well. I'd also posit, if this plays like it did in 0102, that the venture industry will potentially, it's too early to say, but we think potentially very capital intensive plays may also find it harder to raise capital in this environment. People will look for capital efficient plays. That's been a trend we've seen for quite a long time as well. But it's certainly one thing that I think may just be pause for thought there for sure. So the question I think we're driving to here is, will venture capital slow in the coming year, coming months? And I think it's obvious that in places it will. But it's not going to stop everywhere, and it's not going to stop in all places. And I think one thing that for me is pretty interesting is to see how companies like Tencent, Baidu and Alibaba have continued to invest in China given the events that have happened there over the last 3 or 4 months. And so again, I think that's a pretty positive sign that we're seeing investors continuing to invest, continuing to see good opportunities. And one of the things to remember is venture capital is a long-term game. You're making an investment today on the basis that the company is going to be building its business for the next 8 to 12 years. And therefore you're going to see the ups and downs and the blips in the economy, good times and bad. And so venture capitalists have to have a long-term perspective. They have to be optimists by nature. And if history teaches us anything, the 2000s, early 2000s, post the dot-com crash, and then in 08, 09, some of the strongest companies were actually created as a result of the downturn. It's also going to be a buying opportunity for some investors with new cash who maybe were hesitant about valuation 6 months ago, and I do think it's probably likely we'll see valuations take a hit in the coming months and maybe even longer. We also may see a startup formation may actually slow. And again, if we look at the financial crisis of 08, 09, we saw that at Silicon Valley Bank. But it was actually pretty moderate. They didn't stop. Companies were continuing to be formed. It did slow down. And I think you'll see continuing startups being created. Entrepreneurs often can find this an easier time to get to talent. And yes, it's always hard to raise money. It's always hard. That's not going to go away. But entrepreneurs get through these barriers. This is just another obstacle they will get through. I think it's also important to remember that through the crisis, most corporate investors are going to continue to invest. If you think about firms like GV, Intel, Qualcomm, they've seen the downturns before. They're experienced investors. Sapphire, again, I know Nina Morokovic for over 20 years at this point. You've got teams who've seen the downturns, strong balance sheets, committed investors here. And so our thesis is that you will see most corporate investors continuing to invest, supporting the companies. And these are investors who understand the cycles that they're going through, and the companies that they're investing with continue to invest in both attractive companies from a financial perspective and also a strategic perspective in many cases. So what may change? It may just take longer to get a deal done, and that's not a surprise. You can imagine that most investors today are spending more time focusing on the portfolio companies, leading more internal rounds, and investing in the businesses that are maybe conversations that they're already happening and taking place. So we think that you'll maybe see the pace of deal flow slow, and then length to get a deal done change as well. I think the other thing that's interesting, worth bearing in mind, is that certain areas, so for example digital transformation, are going to be massively accelerating because of this. If you think about the pressure on a CIO or CTO from a traditional company today to move everything virtual or digital today, this is a massive drive for them to accelerate change in their organization. And so yes, this is going to be tough for many people, but it also potentially is a huge catalyst for change. And again, where I think we see change, we also see many opportunities. I think the other thing to think about is, as we think about what the workforce of maybe the second half of this year and going into 2021, I think you'll also see companies thinking about post-pandemic playbooks, what that work environment looks like, what the balance of working from home will be on a part-time or permanent basis versus working in an office, and the office environment will change. And so I think it is going to be interesting just to see how many opportunities are created from these technologies as well. And then maybe just to wrap up and finish it, I will never forget sitting in an investor meeting with Joe Kaeser, who's today the CEO of Siemens, and this was in 2009. He was the CFO of Siemens, and I'll never forget Joe quoting, "The darkest hour is just before dawn." And I think we just have to remember that there is light, there is reason for optimism, there is reason for hope. We will see incredible innovation come. We will see startups bring amazing technology to bear, both tackling COVID directly and helping us all, whether it's at home or in our personal lives. So yes, it will be challenging. Yes, it will be difficult. Yes, there will be companies that fail, but there will also be incredible businesses created, and great companies survive through good times and bad. So with that, I'll pause here and then we'll go to questions. Thanks very much.
Hi, Gerald. Thanks so much for this presentation that you did. I think it gave a really good look into what is happening right now in the world, and I think it was a really good segue from the John Market conference when he was saying that back in the day it was only the tech sector that was affected, and in 2008 it was a more financial sector that is being affected, and now we just kind of living in the world where everything everywhere is being affected, and you one of those people who saw the crises from the technology, the crisis from the finance, and crisis from pretty much all over the different implementations. So what is in general you think the main difference between what we had in 86, what we had in 97, what we had in 2001, 2008? What is the main difference from what we're seeing right now?
So Vlad, thanks for the question. I think you're being very polite because it sounds like you're calling me old, but in a very flattering way. But I think this is unusual in so many dimensions. So firstly, I think this is for pretty much everyone that's alive today globally. It's the first time that we've seen a true pandemic of this scale. You know, we have to go back to 1918, 1919 to see anything comparable at all. So firstly, I think that's just a massive difference. And secondly, I think this was just the speed of this hitting the world. So, over the last 12 weeks, 100 days, I think is one reference that you're seeing people. The world changed dramatically inside 100 days. And it hasn't discriminated in geography and sectors. So clearly some sectors less impacted than others. Some geographies maybe slightly less impacted than others at the moment. But I think it's the speed, it's the sector impact, it's the geographic impact. And I think it's the fact that it's simultaneous around the world, because we've often had certain geographies have held up or certain sectors have held up. And I think in this case, it's harder to tell what's going to happen, particularly in the next month or so. Now, the good news out of this is we do know how to fix the economy. And I think you're already seeing enormous intervention from governments here in terms of economic stimulus. And I think you're going to see coordinated stimulus programs, probably in Europe, States, China, etc., as we think about global recovery, because I think it is really at that scale that we're talking about here.
No, that definitely makes sense. So then in general, how would you say that how the banking system was affected by this virus, and also how banking system is helping to alleviate some of those challenges that we're facing due to the virus? What is your perspective on that?
Yeah. So I think if you look at the origin of this is very different to 08, 09 in the sense of that was a true financial crisis, whereas this isn't. The banks have been in good shape, and I think there's been a lot of lessons learned from 08, 09. So if you think about the fiscal buffers around banks around the world generally, they're in a much healthier state. The balance sheets are stronger, the loan quality is better. So I think that firstly, we've got a good, solid foundation of the banks here. Secondly, I think that the government is working hand in glove with Treasury and also the banks around the world to distribute capital into companies as efficiently as we can. And we're moving at lightning pace, both here in the States, and I think there are similar programs around in many countries around the world trying to do this as well, to try and make sure that the small companies in particular don't collapse. And you'll see government programs for larger sectors, airlines, hotels, etc., happening as well. So I think it, again, if you think about where we are in the States, we're 5 weeks into this. It's hard to say, what's this look like in a month from now, 2 months from now, because we don't necessarily know, are we going to be talking about people coming back into the workforce into the States? If you think about China is the one comparable we can look at, you're seeing people now just starting to come back into the workforce in China. So we could be another 4, 5, 6 weeks before we see some partial recovery coming back into the workforce. There are pockets, I would say, on the consumer side that are probably going to be more challenging than on the corporate side. But there are pockets in corporate sectors, let's pick travel as one, where you can clearly see that large players, whether it's airline companies, hotel companies, are going to be more severely impacted than other parts of the economy. But as I say, the overall health of actually the banks is very good, and I think Treasury has acted incredibly quickly here to intervene in the economy as well.
Awesome. So then, as we're kind of looking into that, what is advice that you're giving your portfolio companies and your clients, and maybe something that you can share with our audience? What are some best tips of weathering the pandemic besides watching the cash and staying optimistic?
Yeah, I've got the scars on my back, having been an investor in 2000 when this happened, and then running investor relations in the States for Siemens in 08, 09. So I think there are some kind of common sense things, which is that everyone is recasting plans at the moment, and if you haven't, you should be. I think you can kind of look at 3 scenarios that people talk about, which is 25% less revenue this year, 50% less revenue, 75% less revenue, and just looking at what the runway looks like, and again, making some assumptions, around your burn, your cash flow, and they're going to be the kind of business basics that I think every company is looking at right now of all sizes. I think I'm afraid to say that the lesson of 0809 is the first cut is generally never deep enough. You don't want to get into muscle, but I think you probably, if you're going to cut and stretch your runway, you probably want to make it stretch further than you think. Fundraising does take longer. It will take longer. It's very fast to go down and very slow to come back is generally how we've seen recessions previously. And you can argue about what the shape of a recovery might look like, whether it's a V or various letters in the alphabet type recoveries. But I think, again, being transparent as a leader really matters. I think over-communicating with your employees matters. Trying not to do cuts and kind of death by 1,000 cuts, that really is hard on employees. So, if you're going to make a cut, try and do it once, be as efficient as you can. It is going to hurt. I think people understand that, and being sympathetic to employees. And you've got to share the pain. This is something, if you're the managers of the business, you've got to share in that as well, and maybe proportionately take more cuts than the workforce as well.
Yeah, definitely. So something that was voiced a little bit earlier during one of our panels is that if you compare the technology world, there's always this contingency plan where the worst scenario is that everything just crashes. Your database is being crushed, your server is being crushed, and this is contingency for pretty much for the worst possible scenarios. And the argument that was made that it was not necessarily true for the businesses, as some of the supply chains, they thought, okay, we might have a delay in one supplier, we might have a delay in another supplier, but no one actually thought that everything is going to stop. So do you think is that business right now will be managing the risk on the same level as banks have been managing since 2008 and 2009? And moreover, do you think that the regulations will be so risk-focused as they have been with the CCAR, as they have been with the Basel III, starting from 2008-2009 crisis?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and because I think it's also probably going to extend into our personal lives as well.
Yeah.
If you think, I think you and I are both in California. We're used to hearing, "Have you got your earthquake kit? Are you prepared? Have you got this, that?" And I think this is going to extend not just at the personal level, but into the professional level as well, which is, clearly we're a bank. We've got our disaster recovery plan. We've got our contingency plans. And I think that you are going to see companies produce, for want of a better term, a kind of post-pandemic plan.
Uh-huh.
It is not going to be business as usual. These are the black swan events that none of us have ever predicted or none of us ever thought. We used to laugh at folks who were the crazy preppers that had a month's worth of food in the basement. Well, boy, do they look pretty smart now. So I think it's obviously it's in the name. It's hard to predict a black swan, but I do think that there are certainly business assumptions that people are going to be looking at and going, maybe we shouldn't have sole source suppliers. Maybe we should have dual source suppliers, or maybe we should have a contingency plan about manufacturing locally and overseas, or whatever it might be. So I do think you're going to see very significant shifts in terms of how people think about this and plan post-pandemic. I think the other thing for everyone here is, now that it's happened, I think it's a big wake-up call for the next one, because I don't think these aren't normally very rare events, and I would hope so. Again, going back to California, I think our assumption has been in California, it's not if there's an earthquake, it's when. And I think that's probably the mentality that you just have to start applying around the world, that there will be another event, we just don't know when it will be.
No, yeah, definitely Sounds exactly like this. So when we kind of talked about how government and how regulations are being imposed, so do you think that the banking industry right now is in the better shape than maybe other companies, or they still kind of trying to cope with the virtual world, virtual customers, virtual retail, virtual investment banking customers, and virtual infrastructure? Do you think banks are better suited in general, or they kind of face the same issue more or less?
I think at the human level, we're all in the same boat together here. You know, everyone's having to adjust to working from home. I'm sure it's the same for you, Vlad, and everyone on the call here, which is, you know, you have a kid that walks across a business meeting, or your kid wants to sit in your lap and you're doing a business meeting. That's sort of the new norm we're all in. And I think there's just a lot more tolerance and understanding for that around the world today. So I think that's probably a net benefit here. Oddly enough, I think, you know, again, maybe just some of the conversations we've had, but I think it's probably true for a lot of people, which is we've probably just reconnected with a lot of people and contacts and kind of just wishing people well. And, you know, how many people I've seen sign off with stay well, which is, you know, I think we're genuinely, you know, do try and look out for each other. And I think, you know, we're fortunate in the banking world, you know, we were able to shift pretty quickly to work from home. Lots of our applications were designed to be driven online. You know, we're on Office 365. We've moved to Zoom 6 months ago. So I think some of these things, whether you're on WebEx or Zoom, you know, we had the technology there. We were fortunate. I think you may have seen some of the posts talking about what were the three biggest drivers of digital transformation in companies. Was it the CIO, was it the CEO, or was it COVID-19? And I have a feeling that COVID-19 is probably the single biggest driver for companies now accelerating digital transformation plans. This is something that, again, I think is just a forcing mechanism for lots of companies. In banking, we may be more used to lots of people doing remote working in parts of banking. You know, most employees would have access to a laptop. That's not true of all companies by any means. So I think again, you know, we're maybe slightly fortunate compared to some sectors. Tech, obviously, tech sector, this is, you know, the norm. But I think a lot of other sectors are now waking up to that reality very quickly.
All right. I think we close to be out of time. Thank you so much for spending this 35 minutes with us. I think it was very informative, and it was a great content. And thank you for sharing the insights from both the financial and Silicon Valley side.
Great.
Thanks so much, Earl.
Thank you.
Right,
Take care.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Our next speaker is Carl Mehta. He's the Chief Executive Officer at AdCast. Carl is a serial Silicon Valley entrepreneur who spends his time challenging the status quo. As a former Obama Digital Fellow and Advisor, he became interested in upskilling nations and preparing citizens for the future of work. Read Carl's book, Financial Inclusion, at the bottom of the pyramid to get a feel of his passion for helping people. He's going to be talking about the future of remote work and how we all can stay more engaged and more productive going virtual and staying virtual in the future.
Hello everyone, nice to meet you all. My name is Carl Mehta. I'm the founder and CEO of AdCast, and I have the opportunity to speak to you. So thank you for your time. My topic today is reimagining employee experience for a remote-first culture. This topic is of tremendous importance, especially in this COVID-19 crisis, where we all are struggling to maintain our productivity, efficiency, performance, and enabling ourselves and our colleagues and our workforce for a remote work, remote learning, and collaboration. So 5 years back, in summer of 2014, I had assembled a team of people, of my colleagues and friends, to think about some of the major problems that we as a team wanted to solve. And our prognosis was that there are three major shifts in the workplace that needs to get addressed. And if they are not addressed with a great technological solution, it would turn into a major crisis. So we forecasted this crisis, what we called an employee experience or a learning experience crisis, mainly driven by three major shifts. Number one, changing workplace, as we are already seeing work from home and remote first. Second, even beyond that, the skills are changing rapidly and they have a shelf life. Third, more and more employees and workforce is looking for self-service and self-directed form of knowledge and access to content and applications and learning. Fourth, we are all living in the times where continuous learning is super critical to be able to do our jobs and to be able to adapt to it. And finally, in a remote environment, we all miss out on a digital experience of a water cooler experience to be able to collaborate informally with our colleagues. So that's about the workplace. Second is the changing workforce, just the nature of that, where we are seeing four generations of workforce in today's workplace. We have boomers which are retiring. We have millennials in the workforce, and they have very short tenure. The data shows that average millennials are in a workplace at a company or an organization only for 18 months. And that puts a lot more pressure on driving more and more collaboration. Fourth, that drives widening skills gap. And there is also a lot of leadership gaps because you have all these new people coming in, and how do you drive that? So that's the second piece about the workforce. The third piece of this whole tsunami is this digital disruption that we've seen everywhere, and the digital transformation. The World Economic Forum talked about it just a couple of years back in the fourth industrial revolution. Everyone is connected. Everything is getting connected. Micro moments, rich videos, self-publishing, all of this stuff is coming in. And you may have seen this, that in the past 20 years, since 2001, 50% of Fortune 500 companies have lost its position in that list. So they are not in that Fortune 500 list because of digital. Now, the forecast is that in the next 5 years, just in the 5 years, we're going to see another 50% of the Fortune 500 companies that will be losing its status from that list. So the pace of change is accelerating. The amount of disruption that is happening, what took 20 years in the past, is just mind-boggling in terms of the amount of change. So this is clearly a huge crisis at an organizational level to be able to adapt and transform itself. But even at an individual level, we see here, we use this persona as Sally, and as an individual, as a knowledge worker, we have to absorb a lot. Now, this is something that we had a prognosis about 5 years back. Now, last year, Harvard Business Review came up with an article in 2019 about the forces shaping future of work. And pretty much the article says exactly what we've been saying and working on it for the past 5 years. So it's sometimes good to be ahead of Harvard in our research about where the next big problems are to be addressed. Next, what is the size of the problem? Like, sure, we hear all these things. We are seeing companies out of business, going out of business because of this. But can we quantify that? How does all this impact employee experience? Because without a tangible number, it is hard to react to a crisis or get a level of support and investment in an organization to work on it. There are 5 areas that we've identified that cost roughly about $1 million a year for every 500 employees. Our own company, AdCast, is roughly about 300 plus people. So we've been able to validate this data. But beyond us, our own company, we work with hundreds of Fortune 500 companies. And so this data is validated across many of these companies. And I'll show you some partial list of that. So there are 5 areas that you should really look at in terms of in terms of costs that you could address in terms of efficiency, productivity, innovation, collaboration, from poor onboarding experience and pre-boarding experience to your employees, which are remote. Second, being slow at on-ramping, post onboarding, and enabling existing employees for new tasks, new workflows, new skills, new business processes. Third, the cost from losing tacit knowledge, because it costs about 4 times more to replace a subject matter experts in that role. So imagine if you're paying someone about $100K, it'll cost you $400,000 to replace if that person has to leave. So attrition is a real problem to be addressed. The fourth is the productivity on finding the right content to the right user at the right time. IDC and McKinsey has data on it. It says 20% of knowledge workers' time is wasted in doing that. 20% is almost like a day in a 5-day week. So that's a lot. And if you translate that into dollars, it's a big amount. And then finally, there is a cost of hard costs of licensing of various different portals and sites that organizations put up without leveraging taxonomy and AI and machine learning to be able to bring that right content. So that all is an extra additional cost that only creates more and more inefficiency. So this is significant. Now, if you're a large enterprise with more than 5,000 employees, 10,000, 20,000, this thing would multiply, as you can see, obviously not at a $1 million rate for every 500, because there's economies of scale. So it might be more like a logarithmic curve as opposed to just a linear curve, but still it could run into tens of millions of dollars that are being wasted in terms of not achieving your top line or your bottom line because of this inefficiencies caused because of a poor employee experience and a learner experience. All right, so now that we have established the forces that and the shifts, the big mega trends, and then second, the tangible cost to it, what can we do about it, right? So we looked at many different frameworks out there about the future of work, how work is changing, what are all the platforms and solutions out there that could be utilized. Out of studying many of those Fortune 500 frameworks, we really settled on and liked the model from NASA that they've created this framework that is very comprehensive in terms of the 8 themes that they look at to enable the workforce for the future. And it really addresses this 4 core pillars centered around, obviously, the culture is the core that we want to preserve, whether you are in office or you are in remote places. You want to maintain that culture and remains the centerpiece of that. But the technology, the people, the place, and the mission, all 4 are super important. And I'll just quickly walk you through, how NASA has thought about this whole future of work. And obviously, they are in the business and in a mission to have the highest quality talent and to retain them for long-term missions and long-term goals. This is super important, super relevant, actually, even in organizations which are in business or otherwise. So theme number 1 is designing for agility. We need to design from the ground up. Agility cannot be an afterthought. You have to design it from the ground up. and focus on impact first. So be driven by what is the end result, the outcomes that you want to expect, the impact that you want to create, and then work backwards and creating that agile workforce. So that's really key for enabling the future workforce. Second, we all have to redefine talent in this new world, in this fourth industrial revolution. Talent is no longer just human talent, but also machine talent. They will be both sitting right next to each other and will be helping each other. So how do we redefine all that? Third, learning and development for a lifetime. We've been saying this, and we've all been hearing about the importance of becoming a lifelong learner, super critical. We'll see more about that in the subsequent charts. Fourth, deploying the ability to mobilize careers, because your people needs to move whether vertically up or horizontally, and we need to take care of our people rather than we see these headlines where large companies are in the same article, in the same press release. It says company X is laying off 5,000 people, but on the other hand, you see that the company is also hiring another 3,000 people or 5,000 people. Now that's really a bad PR, and it's really bad for your own people, bad morale. You could have easily, those companies could have easily redeployed their talent if they were proactive in their thinking in how to upskill themselves, reskill them, and then mobilize them both vertically and horizontally. The next fifth and sixth is all about collaboration, and we will hear more about it. But we've seen tremendous importance now. How we are collaborating currently on this particular virtual summit and sharing value with each other. So that's all becomes very critical. Regardless of the place where we are, I'm currently speaking with you from Silicon Valley, and I'm sure the audience here is from all around the world. The seventh and eighth theme is super important from the whole digital transformation, that third big mega trend that we talked about, which is enabling automation. We have to look at task by task, workflow by workflow analysis, and to be able to identify opportunities for automation. And there's lots of great tools around that has come up just in the last few years to utilize AI, machine learning, machine talent to be able to do that. So this framework is one of the most comprehensive way to kind of look at every aspect of our business or organization, from people to technology, place, mission, and then organize and plan the infrastructure and the capability that every organization will need in order to prepare their organization as well as their workforce for the future. I'll show you a case study of a very large Fortune 100 company, which is in technology space, and they have 130,000 employees. And this is the web and the mobile application screenshot of how they've been able to bring every major key topic from their taxonomy and their ontology right in the front of their employees and give them this really seamless, frictionless employee experience, very much like the Netflix of knowledge and learning. You could see the UX is very modern in terms of providing a Netflix type interface of carousels and channels, and every one of these channels are intelligent channels. So just like your television channels or your radio channels, they automatically bring 24/7 content. Unlike in radio and television, they have to actually program, and somebody on the back end is a whole studio to put those programs. Whereas here, every one of this folders that you see are actually AI driven channels, and they are automatically bringing content that is relevant to that topic, whether it is cloud computing or AI or creativity or analytical reasoning, whatever capability that you are trying to develop, or topics that are relevant to your employees' continuous learning and access to content. So this is super successful. The chairman and CEO of this company uses it himself on his mobile for being mobile first, and the whole AI first has helped them actually, even for some really interesting use cases around in this situation of COVID-19, where people can't even come to their office. But this company is still hiring people, and they're able to do a virtual onboarding, right, using a platform like this from AdCast. Now, you may be wondering that how does all this capability fits into an overall stack? So what's the tech stack for employee experience? So I'll quickly just go through that. If you see this chart from kind of, eyeball it from top to the bottom, on the top are those familiar 5 key moments or opportunities within the employee lifecycle, the new, deep, fast change move. Right below that is a layer for enabling the use cases for each one of those. So you could have dozens of different use cases, from onboarding to offboarding to on-ramping to upskilling to reskilling. Right below that is a layer is where your digital workspaces are. So whether your workspace is a Microsoft Teams, or whether it is Salesforce, or whether it is VMware Workspace ONE, any of those could be your digital workspace where the work is being done. And you get inside that workspace this ability to drive intelligent knowledge and content and learning. And that's enabled by that layer 3 below that, which is the workforce capability and development and productivity. And and that is the core of the engine around the taxonomy and the AI and the machine learning, and also with tools like MyGuide that enables the workflow automation. And inside that, you can have an embedded capability to drive your Zoom and your WebEx or Microsoft Teams, your video conferencing, which is critical for your remote learning. Below that layer is the content providers. So this is where there is hundreds and thousands of different content providers. If you look at from premium to free to micro to macro, and all of that needs to get aggregated, and you need a marketplace to bring them together so that you can create really a buffet of kind of like an Amazon type marketplace and allow your employees to use whatever they would like to use. And then you have a box around the layer around skill coins or benefits card, which enables your employees to be able to even contribute, just like your 401k we have in the United States as our retirement program or a pension program. Something similar you can do for reskilling, and many of these leading edge companies are adopting that to be able to enable the employee and the employer to be able to contribute that and save every month, so that you don't wait for a situation where you need to be upskilled but you don't have the funds to pay for it. All of this requires obviously a great integration capability, an integration framework, a strong data and analytics foundation to be able to move data across all of these layers. So this is the core of this new knowledge cloud capability that every organization needs it, and some of the leading organizations have already been using it, and we've seen some great results. Below that is the standard platforms that pretty much out there for 15-20 years now, or maybe more than that. Your classic talent management layer from the big guys like the SAP and the Oracles and the Microsoft Dynamics or Workday, and then right below that is the core HRIS, which is basically your employee records, and that all needs to move up into this whole big layer 3, which is orchestrating this aggregation, curation, personalization of the content related to use cases. But ultimately, it's feeding all these services based on the employee records that are sitting in your HRIS, and it is also feeding back a lot of this data into your talent management and performance management. So this 3 layers kind of gives a full tech stack for this new next generation employee experience. Finally, I'd like to end this presentation with some of the numbers. We talked about the numbers in terms of the cost, almost $1 million for every 500 employees. But what are the other economic impact that you can bring, right? So you can increase productivity. We talked about almost 20% increase in productivity. We have retention. You can increase about 50% in retention. Increase faster innovation, more collaboration, 2x more collaboration, 2x faster capability development, and almost you can have 50% cost savings if you're using this new tech stack instead of older tech stack, which a lot of organizations are spending money on a whole bunch of this. So these are really tangible, hardcore benefits with real numbers that gives the ROI. And many of the organizations struggle with building a business case, although they understand all of this, where the future of work and employee experience and learning experience is going, but they really need to build a hardcore ROI with actual tangible results. So this is something very useful in terms of numbers. And obviously, overall, when you improve your productivity, retention, innovation, collaboration, capability, you really create a much better culture, which is really the foundation of everything. So I'd like to end my presentation and talk here. Happy to take any questions. My email and my Twitter handle is here. Appreciate you watching this with patience and hopefully with interest, and looking forward to connecting with all of you in person. Thank you.
Hello, Carl. How are you doing today?
Good.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the great overview and kind of putting everything in the very nice framework of what is happening and how everything is being changed for all of us as we face the changes that are happening right now in the world. So I guess my first question would be is that we still, on the one side, we're trying to innovate. On the other side, we're trying to almost in the survival mode. So have AdCast created something new since the outbreak? And if you did, what was your modus operandi? What did you think? How did you manage to cut through the noise, to cut through the different channels that are kind of bombarding people, bombarding clients, bombarding employees, bombarding all of us in this time?
Well, Russell, yeah, great question. I think those paradoxical situations where on one side we have the chaos and a disaster and a business continuity to deal with. On the other hand, we have to maintain our business, and the third thing is to also drive innovation. All those three things from the outside or from a overall standpoint may look like very conflicting priorities. But a lot of great innovation, actually, if we look back, necessity is the mother of invention. And so when we are really pushed hard on achieving something in a very constrained environment, a lot of good innovation comes out. So in fact, one of the things that we are seeing now with all of our customers, which are hundreds of Fortune 500 companies and millions of users worldwide, is that actually the amount of creativity and knowledge sharing and collaboration that has really gone up. We see that every day in our systems. You've seen some data from Microsoft Teams where their DAU has spiked up to 44, 50 million users. We have a similar large 200% spike. And what we are seeing is that actually, as people are adapting to this new reality and this new environment of work from home, there is actually a lot more need to connect with each other, which we may have not realized if we were business as usual and we go to the office or we travel. So people are making actually a lot more special attempt and a special effort to reach out, to connect digitally, virtually, just like you guys have put together this event virtually and brought everyone together. Same thing we are seeing across all of our organizations that are using our platform. And a lot more original knowledge sharing is happening, peer-to-peer, one-to-many, many-to-many. And also people are using some of the time that they got back from the commute in their own self-development. So, one of the core capability of our platform is that self-development, and we are seeing a lot of great spike over there as well. So I think there is at least some silver lining besides all this bad news out there. But it's very sad to see some of the death and the destruction. But there is some silver lining where we are all coming together because we are all in this together, and the digital platforms and with this virtual online remote work, remote learn, remote collaboration, it's really helping.
So on the part of being in every one of us being in this together. So I asked this a couple of our speakers already, but I'm really interested in your perspective. Is that when we face in the world of not just virtual workforce and not the virtual collaboration, but virtual everything, virtual customers, virtual virtual dinners, virtual events, right? How do you think this redefines the way we engage with ourselves for sales purposes, for the support purposes, for just being public purposes?
Yeah, I think the digital infrastructure which has been there and many organizations had not adopted this kind of a situation forces them. So it's kind of like a forcing function to drive adoption and usage of digital. And I think this whole buzzword about digital transformation and fourth industrial revolution that has been around us, but many organizations had resisted it. They did not invest in the digital infrastructure, and we will see that there will be a surge. We are already seeing that surge either in investing in a digital infrastructure. We are seeing a lot of organizations calling us, and we would have not expected this many inbound sales calls, but our salespeople are saying that the phone's ringing continuously. So these are the folks who had not invested in digital infrastructure, but this kind of situation really, makes them to do it, forces them. The people who had invested in it are doubling down, tripling down, and investing in it. So I think we're going to see a tremendous innovation in leveraging this digital infrastructure to be able to look at every line of activity and say, just like you mentioned, digital dinners and we've seen our friends and colleagues doing a digital happy hour, and everybody gets on this video conferencing and then gets a bottle of wine, and So I think every activity of human life will have to think about how you can leverage digitally, because although this is a really bad pandemic, but I think it has also taught us a lesson that if something like this from nowhere can become so big in such a short time, there can be many more events like this. So I think this has created some kind of a permanent level of consciousness in everyone's mind that we will have to now be prepared. So many of these activities that we are learning in this digital world, it might stay with us for a long time, even during when we are post COVID-19. I think it will fundamentally change how we work, we learn, we play, we interact, we do our sales, we do our support. A lot of that is going to change permanently coming out of this pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. It is something that I think we will thinking. So you, as being a provider of the service, right? What do you think is, as people try to innovate, as they try to change something, as they try to onboard new technologies, what have you seen as the biggest resistance from onboarding those new technologies? Is it time? Is it infrastructure? Is it money? What do you think is the biggest constraint, and what do you think is the biggest misconception about adopting new technologies and adopting new state of mind, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say it's two things. One is cultural. There are certain organizations they are culturally driven by investment in digital, being very innovative, being on the leading edge, and they're more risk taker because culturally they don't look at technology from a risk averse standpoint. And those in terms of, if you say that what are the two big obstacles, the number one is just an organization's maturity and their cultural makeup in terms of how much they are technologically savvy versus very risk averse. We've seen that educational institutions, for example, colleges and universities have been a laggard in adopting technologies. Healthcare way behind. I think this kind of a situation will make digital health and digital learning as something that people resisted for all these years because they did not want technology. Culturally, they were more like, hey, I want to see the person in the room and I want to see the patient. Now they're going exactly the opposite. I don't even want to see the patient. I would rather see you on the video than actually bring you here in my hospital. So I think that cultural barrier was a big one. And I think that this kind of a adversity always helps us to rethink our assumptions. And I think this adversity is going to help that. That's one obstacle. The second obstacle is once you pass through that, and I think it's pretty no-brainer to see the advantages and the benefits of technology. But the second big barrier always has been the ROI. When we all know that when we work in an organization, if you want to bring in a technology that costs money, you have to convince many layers, and you have to make a very solid business case of how you're going to get a payback from it. And I think most people are not that savvy enough to be able to put together a very compelling ROI case. And if you put that, then you would definitely get the money, because if you can show that there is a clear ROI. So one of the things that I tried to do in my presentation earlier is I started with an ROI chart. You saw that, and I also ended with an ROI chart, because it's very important that we all see the benefit of technology, but most of the organizations they don't realize the benefit, because they just cannot put together a one nice page of documenting quantifying the ROI and then get that approval, so that they can really put their organization forward. And just that one page is just holding them back to move to the other world, which could have been a lot more productive, a lot more efficient.
No, that definitely makes sense. So with that in mind, so right now we obviously are all virtual, and previously we have been all physical. And I already asked this question, but again, I'm really interested in your perspective. Is that what do you think is going to be the balance as we get out of this pandemic? As you said, do you think this mentality, do you think this misconception about being physical versus being virtual is going to change? And if it will change, where do you think the tipping end will be? Is it going to be more virtual, or is it going to be more physical at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think coming out of this, we will all experience that people will get much more comfortable with being virtual and digital, right? There was either a cultural resistance to it, or a financial resistance to it, or some kind of not knowing technology better. I think very rapidly, given in such a short time, we are being asked to completely adapt to this whole new situation. Everybody has gotten very comfortable doing, my daughter is 15-year-old, and she's doing from morning 7 a.m. to evening 4 p.m. her classes back to back on video conference. We would have, even as a parent, I would have not, I would have felt that it's not very effective, and I would have wanted her to be in the classroom. But even now, we've gotten kind of somewhat used to it. So what we're going to see, one permanent shift, is that I think we will all get connected a lot more digitally. We will all start to be more productive and do a lot of work more digitally. So I think this shift to the digital world that was happening quite rapidly, but only to some segment of the society. Many other vertical industries like health and education and learning and even work wasn't that remote first culture, but we're going to see that permanent shift now coming out of this.
No, that makes sense. So as the last question, what would be the one advice, given all of your entrepreneurial experience, what would be the one advice that you would give to the business leaders, to the business owners, to the managers, of looking forward and weathering this particular crisis and everything else that will be coming our way? As you said, it's inevitable. We are going to have something similar happening to us in our lives to come.
Well, in adversity, I have always liked Warren Buffett's advice that when everybody is feeling greedy, you should be fearful, and when everybody's feeling fearful, you should be greedy. So I think this kind of economic downturn, and these are all temporary. The world has survived through many of the shocks and recessions and even depressions. So these are the times. These are the best time to invest. These are the best time when you have access to an availability of talent. And the other good thing about sometimes recession is that the noise level comes down dramatically. So, if you have a real product, a real company, a real people who are capable of delivering stuff, you will be able to achieve a lot more during this quieter time than during the noisy time.
Awesome, Carl. Thank you so much. We're right on time. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and providing answers to our questions. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Thanks so much.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks. You. right now we're going to do the switch to our evening session. Same thing as before. I'm just going to stop a stream for a couple quick seconds, and then we will return with our evening sessions with Mark Borger from the Executive Briefing Center at IBM. Then we're going to talk to Catherine Kalarko, who's Senior Director of Automation Anywhere, and we're going to end up with Sterling Hawking, who's Global Innovation Expert and Executive Coach, who will share some of their insights of what is happening right now and how we can take some of those opportunities and turn the challenges that we have into the positive outcomes. Stay tuned, and we're going to be back in a second.